Good afternoon, everyone. If I could ask you to take your seats. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the business meeting of the Governing Board of the South Florida Water Management District to order. It's September 12th, 2024. And Mr. Steinle, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? If you could all stand and face the flag. Thanks, Mr. Steinle. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Mr. Bergeron, Mr. Martinez, Ms. Meads, and Colonel Roman are all joining us remotely. And I'm assuming you guys are all on. You don't need to say anything now. Board members, I'm going to ask that you make sure your microphone is on and that you speak into the mic so that online attendees can hear you. Members of the public on Zoom who wish to address the board, you can use the raise your hand feature. And if members of the public are having any trouble and need help, please go to our website, sfwmd.gov, and click the Ask Us button at the top of the page, and the staff will help you out. If you're using a phone and you'd like to comment, please press *9 to raise your hand, and then *6 to mute and unmute your phone. It's a courtesy to others who wish to speak. Members of the public are asked to comment only once on each topic. And we'll take public comment first from those who are here in person and submitted a comment card, followed by those with raised hands on Zoom. After today's business meeting, we are going to host the public hearing on fiscal year 2024-2025 tentative millage rates, tax rolls, and tentative budget at exactly 5:15. The Zoom meeting link will remain the same. Board members, please be advised we cannot start the budget meeting early or late. Now we'll move to employee recognitions with Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, we've got a number of them here. First of all, I'd like to announce our September 2024 Employee of the Month, which is Vijay Mishra, Principal Engineer, Division of Engineering, Construction, and Modeling. So, Vijay came to the district in 2014, and he went straight into project management. And project managers at the district have more than one project. They got multiple projects that they're trying to do all at one time. But Vijay had a project that you guys invested in early, and that is the seepage wall project on the east side of Everglades National Park. Now, we all know how important this seepage wall is. When it would rain hard down in South Florida, the water conservation area would flood and the 8.5 square mile area would flood at the same time, which meant the Corps would close off the water conservation area and not drain it through Shark River Slough. So we knew it had to happen. We had a district project, 2.3 miles, which Vijay led, to get that put in place first. And then he worked with the Corps of Engineers to make it another iteration of the SEP project completion, the SEP New Water project, which was the remaining 7.3 miles of seepage wall. Project management's difficult. There's working with local governments, there's working with neighbors, local communities, there's logistics. And during this time, there was also supply chain challenges. And this wall, pretty much by definition, is a cement wall, a cement bentonite wall, and that was the shortage, cement. But Vijay, working with the contractor, was able to navigate that difficult issue and deliver this project ahead of schedule. And if you're at the ribbon cutting, you can see the picture. It's wet on one side, dry on the other. This project is working. Vijay had the best time updating me every other week on this project progress because he could always say it was ahead of schedule. That's not always the case. It's a challenging work we do. But Vijay did it well, and that's why he's our September Employee of the Month. Congratulations, Vijay. All right, September 2024 Team of the Month. which is a big team. It's the S332C Emergency Pump Station Repair Team. That's Matthew Alexander, Jesse Browning, Henry Bowman, Chad Burnshead, Bruce Chesser, Luis Colon Pinero, Leo Coney, Nathan Conroy, Brian Furland, Christopher Galia, Sean Gao, Ernesto Garcia, Jose Guardiario, Robert Hall, Suzanne Halverson, Steele Holiday, Nimi Jayakumar, Ozell Jones, Jack Kilgore, Brenda Mills, Michael Moda, Jeremy Padrick, Roscoe Prescott, Zubayed Rakib, Jorge Serrano, Tyler Sizemore, Charles Smith, James Sneckenberg, Robert Todd, Romero Torres, William Valdez, Jesse Van Eyck, Mark Wilsnack, Paul Wilson, and Michael Wyant. Woo! So, we have about 90 pump stations around the Water Management District, and as you know, a lot of them are past their design life or nearing their design life and need to be maintained and managed very adeptly. And this 332C pump station is beyond its design life. It's on the list. We're hoping to start reconstructing that pump station in the near future. But in the meantime, we're having to manage it. And the way it's set up is you got a pump station, then you had large corrugated pipes that would bridge the pump station to the detention area down in Miami-Dade County, providing flood protection for the communities, but getting water in the detention area to help feed Taylor Slough. So it kind of has environmental benefit with flood control. And that corrugated pipe that went to the detention area was failing, and finally it just completely blew apart, right? And then that shut down the pump station. Well, this is a critical flood control pump station for that area because otherwise you're sending it harmfully to the estuaries. So this failure happened within the last year. So this big team had to design a solution, which was abandoning pipes and going with a canal, get that solution permitted, and then mobilize, get the pieces, and construct it, all within the last year. Very impressive. They worked around the clock. It's an amazing work. It was done by our field construction crew to get it done. It is now online, and it is providing the benefits that that whole situation was designed to prevent. Thinking about designing, permitting, and constructing in 1 year is pretty amazing for this team. And I hate to tell you this, but the longest pole in that tent was the permitting part. Not surprising to anybody here, but we got it done, and this team got it done, and we really appreciate it. Congratulations, Team of the Month. We're gonna do this, a big church picture kind of thing. There you go. Thank you. A lot of us, huh? Yep. How's it going? Hey. Nice to see you, Bruce. Wow. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Ben, no color commentary. All right, 25-year service award. Charles Walker, he's a lead station diesel engine operator mechanic. He's been here for 25 years. Is Charles in the audience? No. If you might have noticed, it's been raining a lot lately, and Charles is responsible for one of our pump stations, so he's actually out at the pump station. So when it stops raining, we'll pick him up at a future meeting. All right. We have another 25-year service award, Jack Ismalone, Principal Construction Cost and Estimator with the Division of Engineering, Construction, and Modeling. So Jack got to us 25 years ago, and he became a project manager working on the project in the STAs, and particularly in One West, helping with our engineering crew in One West and our Everglades construction project. Is that what it's called? Yes, okay. Helping up with that project. And then he, of course, helped with a lot of spillways and other projects that we were doing. But ultimately, he got into the cost and budget management of our organization, which really touches every single project we got, right? And so, you know, when it comes to delivering on a project, you got to understand the cost, how it's going to unfold, the budgeting year to year, those types of things. And Jack was helping all the engineers, which really exposed them to all kinds of different construction projects, different types, different styles, construction methods, all those types of things. So he became one of those go-to gurus, font of all knowledge kind of people that knows about construction. And ultimately, in the last 5 years, he got into the core side of things with the cost share and the construction on the cost share. So a lot of tremendous experience. And so now he's really heading up all of our cost estimating, our budgeting, our planning when it comes to construction. He helps us put together a capital improvement plan. Capital improvement, the legislative budget requests. He helps us with cost estimates, negotiating bids if we only get one and we're in that circumstance, because he can break down a bid and know where the wiggle room is in a bid. Very valuable. I know every time we talk to one of you about what bids came in, that your first question is, what was our estimate? That's Jack. Jack puts that estimate together. So he's an incredible asset to us, but also on the side, he's into music. He's a musician. For almost 30 years, he taught bar and bat mitzvah students that really allowed him to share his love for music with the younger people. And he also served as cantor at his local temple in Delray Beach. So when it comes to work-life balance, you could say Jack's as harmonious. All right. Anyway, Jack, you're doing great work for us. Thank you so much for your 25 years of service. All right, another 25-year service award. This is for Monique Lehampas, lead scientist, Water Quality Bureau. Monique came to us 25 years ago after having grown up in Brazil and getting her chemical engineering degree in Brazil. And then she came to us and really went into water quality monitoring. And so she started in our water quality sampling in the Everglades. We do a lot of sampling in the Everglades, and she started in 1999. Doing that, and we still use that data today because we're always looking at trends and what's going on and how it's different than the past. So she really started in Everglades, and then she became a field project manager for that effort. And project management for sampling is complicated. It's land access, it's logistics, it's QA/QC, it's data management, it's all these types of things, which she did for 13 years as we were monitoring the Everglades, and that was part of the federal settlement agreement. And if you mess up monitoring under a federal settlement agreement, it spins up everyone from here to Washington, D.C. So it was a lot riding on her shoulders, and she did a great job at that. Then she was promoted into the compliance assessment and monitoring and evaluation, where she helped with the planning and more of the management side of things to make sure the monitoring was planned right. You look at the needs and match them with the resources, and really getting the scientists deployed and into the district, in accordance with management priorities. And then she was finally promoted to the lead scientist and QA officer in the water quality monitoring section, where she's really just kind of a leader in the group. With QA, we've talked about it in the past, it's critically important. If that isn't done right, then it really unravels a lot of things. And so she not only does it herself, but she also trains the employees and the contractors in that QA role while she's being a lead scientist for all the efforts that she's responsible for. The other thing that Monique has done for us is she has been in emergency response since the early 2000s, where she leads the follow-up teams for the follow-up sampling or flood evaluations or all that type of stuff for all the storms we've had since the early 2000s. She does that extremely well and is still there doing it today. The one thing we know about Monique is she's never shied away from new responsibilities, as you can tell in her career, and we really appreciate what she's brought to us. In her spare time, she loves to travel and spend time with her large extended family, but we're glad she's here with our large extended family. Monique, thanks for your 25 years. All right. Last 25-year service award, Mr. Chair, and that is for Tracy Picone, Chief Consulting Engineer, Applied Sciences Bureau, Division of Water Resources. So Tracy has been a licensed civil engineer for over 30 years. She graduated from the University of Florida with a Bachelor of Science in Engineering. Ironically, at her commencement address, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas spoke to her during her commencement. But that's not what inspired her to love the Everglades. I'll get to that later. So basically, she came into the district and she jumped straight into stormwater treatment areas, both literally and figuratively, with permitting and optimization. Y'all didn't pick up on that. It's pretty good. She did jump into those STAs. And so she was eventually worked on it. Optimization has always been her focus, but she was promoted to the chief engineer in 2006 and became responsible for figuring out how we're going to meet this water quality-based effluent limit. That should be easy. But in 2012, she picked up the science plan, really, which was a big investment, really understanding, doing very deep science on trying to understand the dynamics of a stormwater treatment area to try to get to that QBEL. So she has been out there thinking about the management approaches. If you've been to us on a stormwater treatment area tour, you have probably been with Tracy Picone. I know I have a few times. She's very passionate about that, and just incredible knowledge and experience in stormwater treatment areas, and she's really a national expert, in my opinion. But a little bit of her history, she's the 8th generation Floridian. She has a relative that fought in the Revolutionary War. And she grew up spending many weekends in the Everglades, riding on half tracks and airboats near her family's cattle ranch on the Miami Canal, where the state actually purchased the cattle ranch in 1986 and is now as part of the Rotenberger Wildlife Management Area. So she spent a lot of time in the Everglades, and that's where she got her passion, and that's why she's dedicated her career to protecting the Everglades. Tracy, thanks for your 25 years of service. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Bartlett, and congratulations to those of you who won awards, and thank you to those of you for your years of service. Molly, we're going to go to agenda revisions now, item number 4. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are none, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll go to item number 5 on the agenda. We're going to poll the board members, including Mr. Bergeron, Martinez, Meads, and Colonel Roman, about abstentions. And I'll start with you, Mr. Steinle. Do you have any?
I have none.
Thank you. I have none. Mr. Butler, do you have any?
I have none.
Mr. Bergeron, do you have any abstentions?
No, I do. I do not.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Martinez?
None.
Thank you. Ms. Meads?
None.
Thank you. Colonel Roman?
None.
Thank you. We'll go to item number 6 now, which is the Big Cypress Basin Board Report with Colonel Roman, or Chair Roman, of the Chair of the Big Cypress Basin Board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. The Big Cypress Basin Board met on August 23rd, 2024. We began our meeting with the Basin Administrator's report from Lisa Keeler, who recognized staff efforts and interagency coordination during Tropical Storm Debbie. Beecham first with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, provided an overview of Lake Trafford management and the challenges of restoration and aquatic habitat enhancement. The lake remains an impaired water body with high nutrient levels and poor water clarity, despite restoration efforts and dredging in 2010. FWC and the Lake Trafford team will continue to look for solutions. Next, Dr. Cassandra Armstrong presented on the recovery initiatives in the cypress, pinelands, and wet prairie habitats within the Picayune Strand Restoration Project. As we continue to plug canals and rehydrate the land, flora and aquatic fauna are rebounding on these environments as they are restored. Kathy Collins gave us an overview of the Bird Rookery Swamp Boardwalk Replacement Project, detailing the estimated cost and timeline to replace the aging boardwalk. Construction is planned during the wet season to avoid the peak hiking time. Lastly, Candida Heater presented an overview of the basin's fiscal year 2024-2025 millage and budget. The board approved a continued millage rate and final budget of $22,006,945. We closed our meeting with technical and staff reports, and our next Basin Board meeting is October 25th at 11 a.m. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair, subject to anyone's questions.
Thank you, Chair Roman. Does anyone have any questions or comments? If not, thanks very much. We'll move to item 7, which is the approval of the minutes for the August 8th, 2024 meeting. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes for August 8th meeting? Hearing none, could I have a motion?
Motion?
I have a motion to accept them. Is there
Second.
And a second. I'll call that question. Mr. Steinle? Yes. I'm going to vote yes. Mr. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Meads?
Yes.
And Colonel Roman?
Yes.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. Let's see. We're going to consider the approval of the 2025 Governing Board Committee meeting dates. The proposed 2025 meeting list was included in the board packet. Board members, if you have any concerns, now would be a good time to let us know. I'm not hearing any, so staff, have fun. We don't need a vote on that. Now we'll go to the Executive Director's report with Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So since the last meeting, we've had two actually historic events happen. In fact, it was in the last 2 weeks these things happened, which will go down in history, quite frankly. First of all, Secretary Connor signed the record of decision for the Lake Okeechobee Component A reservoir. This is the large reservoir north of Lake Okeechobee that can hold half a foot of water off of Lake Okeechobee when put into use. Once that is signed, it is primed, ready for Water Resources Development Act approval and inclusion in WRDA 24. Once that gets there, it is there, right? It is getting something to authorization under the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan is a monumental feat. I'm very proud of the staff and really grateful for the assistance we got from the Corps for making this thing happen. It was signed on August 28th. The record of decision and all the documents are on our website. It will be ready. I briefed the 16 County Coalition last Friday and informed them of its signature, and they got extremely excited, understanding the benefits of storage north-south of Lake Okeechobee on helping control Lake Okeechobee levels. If you think about it, with this reservoir, the EAA reservoir, and the underground storage north of the lake, that capacity is about 1.5 feet of control off of Lake Okeechobee. So it's really impressive volume, and so this is now getting ready for congressional authorization, right? Thank you, staff, for making that happen. The other major milestone, which happened yesterday, was I got to attend a briefing with General Spellman where the Western Everglades Restoration Plan was presented to General Spellman. And all the generals were there, both the tribes were there, and he signed it. And so the chief's report was signed for Western Everglades Restoration. You can recall a year ago, there was a lot of controversy around Western Everglades restoration. And I want to thank a lot of the staff here at the district, in particular Jennifer Reynolds, for really working with the landowners to make, and the Corps, to make changes to the Western Everglades restoration plan to make it more acceptable for everybody. And now everyone is supporting it. It is ready for authorization. And so, and heck, we've already started building it, right, on the southern features, right? So it's an important project, makes a huge difference for the Everglades. So there we have two when you look at SERP in total, you got two very substantial projects now ready for authorization this year. So very exciting. I just mentioned General Spellman, but I'd also like to let you know that tomorrow, General Spellman is hosting his change of command ceremony where he will bring in and transfer command over to General Butch Graham, who is the Deputy Chief of Engineers and really worked on SERP as Deputy Chief Engineer. So we had General Spellman, who was very supportive, and now we're going to have General Graham as the Chief of Engineers of the Corps, who has been down here numerous times for SERP tours, resiliency tours after Ian. So he's very familiar with South Florida, so it's good to have that familiar face as the Chief of Engineers. Yesterday, I was able to see General Kelly briefing General Spellman, who is taking the role of General Graham. Right? So General Kelly was the South Atlantic Division general, very familiar with SERP, was down here for different tours and occasions for SERP. So we'll have both General Kelly and General Graham at the leadership roles on the military side in the Corps, who are both very familiar faces for us. So that's good news. Later today, we'll have the first of two budget hearings to adopt our budget for next fiscal year. And I want to talk about that budget because it's quite monumental. $1.63 billion budget for South Florida, right? For the South Florida ecosystem, for Everglades, and for our flood control system repairs. That's the biggest budget we've ever had, minus one budget where we passed bonds a long time ago. So that was a blip. But since then, this is the biggest budget we've ever had. Thanks goes to Governor DeSantis and the legislature for being very supportive of our efforts down here in South Florida. With this budget, we will begin and supercharge the rebuilding of our aging CNSF system. We'll be adapting that CNS system to change conditions like sea level rise. In fact, on consent today, you're approving three $50 million grants that are coming to the district for 3 structures in Miami-Dade County. Staff's done a great job getting those grants ready, and that's coming from FEMA. So that's part of this budget. We'll be continuing to build storage north of Lake Okeechobee. We're going to start and build all the storage in St. Lucie County for protection of the Indian River Lagoon. That's 3 new reservoirs for the Indian River Lagoon. That will be part of this budget. We will be finishing up the Caloosahatchee C43 reservoir. We'll be building the EAA reservoir project, including starting the pump station for the EAA reservoir this next fiscal year, and of course, wrapping up all the final details on the stormwater treatment area associated with the EAA reservoir project. We'll be finishing the construction phase of restoration strategies. We'll be continuing to build SEP North, which is getting the flow into the Central Everglades at the right place. We will continue uncorking Tamiami Trail with those 3 culverts we just broke ground on in the L28 levity on the west side, plus continue to work on US 41 and Loop Road to get it to Lossman Slough. We'll be finishing Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands. We'll be helping the Corps finish Picayune Strand. We'll be starting, permit pending, Lake Hickpatchee project for the Caloosahatchee Estuary. We will bring new dispersed water management projects online, including one on Monday at Parton Ranch and then the El Maximo Ranch in the northern part of the district. So lots of robust northern Everglades and estuaries protection, including the Lower Kissimmee SDA. We'll continue working on that. And you're probably going to see more solicitations come out from the district for looking for projects to help protect our estuaries in Lake Okeechobee. All part of this budget. So as you think about that, as you work on this at 5:15 this afternoon, know that we're doing great things for South Florida. Speaking of Northern Everglades estuaries and restoration, you've been asking questions about how that's going, in particular how the BMP program is going. And we called West Gregory, who is here, and he's agreed to come and present sort of the update on the BMP program that they're implementing for our South Florida ecosystem. So I'd like to turn it over to West with your indulgence, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming, West.
Thanks for being here, Wes.
Thank you guys for having me, and thank you for inviting me. I think it's important that we work together as agencies, and we all want the same thing. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what our agency is doing to help with the water quality and water quantity issues in your area. So again, thank you very much. Oh, wow, that's cool. First off, I'll give you a broad overview of our office's responsibility. It's the Office of Agricultural Water Policy. We develop and implement best management practices. We implement a cost share program for folks to receive cost share money to help implement those practices. We do water supply projections for agricultural use, and we supply that to the water management districts using our FSED models. We do scientific and technical research that helps identify new best management practices and to verify that best management practices are working. We do other little statutory responsibilities, and we do binding determinations as they relate to exemptions to the ERP program. So I wanted to give you an update on the BMPs. BMPs are agricultural best managers, are management strategies on the landscape that are intended to increase the efficiency of nutrient management, irrigation management, and water resource protection. There's 3 big categories, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. There are practical, cost-effective actions that producers can take that conserve water, reduce or control the amount of fertilizer, animal waste, and other pollutants that can enter our natural resource water bodies. Their applicability is based on the intensity of the operation, and these BMPs must balance environmental protection and agricultural production. A question I get a lot of, and I wanted to talk about when BMPs are applicable. When does a producer have to do best management practices? The statute requires that if you're a producer and you're in a basin management action plan area, that you're required to either implement BMPs, so you sign up for BMPs with our office, or you do water quality monitoring through a program done by DEP. Most, if not all people, choose to do the BMP program. And how are those BMPs developed? Well, first off, you're probably aware of the BMAP program. DEP, they identify impaired water bodies. They come up with a total maximum daily load. and this is very broad, and Drew can probably correct me on all of this. They come up with a total maximum daily load, and they get an allocation. And each group within that area has to do something to help bring that water body back into compliance with the water quality standards. And so non-point source pollution, agriculture being one of those people, they have to do best management practices. So our agency, the Department of Agriculture, develops those best management practices, or we're updating them right now. DEP reviews those practices and makes sure that they will do what we think they'll do by helping the water quality or water quantity issues. We adopt those BMPs by rule. DEP is required to verify their effectiveness, and if we see problems, we institute a reevaluation of those best management practices and go back through the rulemaking cycle again. We have our little circle of life up here. You can see on the left side, it's the TMDL, but on the right side, you can see where DEP, FDACS, and the water management districts are doing research to demonstrate the effectiveness of BMPs or to identify new BMPs. So this is all feeding into the little circle of life we have going. So enrolling in BMPs, how does someone go about doing that if you're a producer? They contact our staff, and they go out and visit and observe the operation, the agricultural operation. And they say, these BMPs are in our booklet are applicable to you, and we sign them up to do them. And then within 18 months, the producer is expected to be implementing those things. And then every 2 years, our staff goes out and checks on the implementation of those BMPs. If things are going well, great, good, that's going well. But if not, we work with them, talk to them about how they can improve, how they can do something better. Is there cost share available to do that? Most people come into compliance. For those who don't, there's 2 chances to come into compliance. We send them letters saying, hey, you really need to do this. Here's their official letter saying you need to do this BMP properly. And then if they don't do that, it's a more serious letter. And after that, they're referred to DEP for enforcement. So broadly, that is the BMP program. I want to talk to you about things we're working on in our office right now. I've established 5 big goals for our office that are to improve the perception of best management practices, increase enrollment statewide in the BMP program, update our manuals, implement regional projects, and to improve our relationships with our sister agencies and with our research partners. So the first one is improving the perception of BMPs. That's kind of a twofold thing. That is, there's an issue with producers trying to understand why do they need to do these things. That's an education thing. And then there's perception with the public that what are BMPs doing to help water quality? And those are 2 really big fundamental issues. And how do you get at that? I don't know if you guys watched ESPN in the early 2000s. There was a really cool segment called Numbers Never Lie. And that's true. We need to collect the data to explain the program. There are over 22 million people in the state of Florida, and we have between 12 and 13,000 producers signed up for BMPs. If you go to these producers, their operation areas, a lot of them are doing great things. They're doing a lot. They're helping improve the water quality. Their livelihood is tied to the land. They want to do the right thing. My old boss used to say 99% of the people want to do the right thing, Wes. You just got to show them how. So we need to be out there educating them. You're sending out thank you cards to the people who are enrolled, trying to make it understandable for them how to do these best management practices. On the flip side, for the public, I can't take 22 million people to 12,000 operations. I would love to, it'd be a lot of fun. It'd be the only thing I did though. So we need to tell that story through numbers and presenting those numbers in a meaningful way, collecting them in a meaningful way. And we've started doing that. We really leaned into GIS to do that. You can see a map that is up on our website right now. It's also on our OpenGIS portal, so you can download it. Those colors represent different types of commodities and where they're produced and who's enrolled in BMPs. So it shows it graphically on a map. So you can see that's a lot of people. That is 13,000 or close to 13,000 different producers implementing BMPs throughout the state. Also, cost share. We invest quite a bit into cost share, about $13 million a year. We need to understand what that money was going for and what was the benefit. So we started mapping out where it was happening, what it was doing, what was the benefit of it. And then we can break it down by year and type and soil water conservation district. That will help us inform, hey, if we're seeing a water quality problem here, are we doing everything we can to help that out? So we're pinpointing where that data exists. And this was all basically on paper a year ago. So now we're moving it into a way that we can take the data and understand it and make decisions about that, and use that and share it with others to help make those decisions. Also on the producer side, we're revamping the cost share program. We're working to make sure the eligibility and requirements are out there for people to see, and also what they can cost share in. So we're trying to make that more transparent for people so they understand what is going on. Our next big goal is enrollment. If you look at our annual report, we're doing pretty good on enrollment. We have 83% of irrigated lands in the state enrolled, but that still only means we have about a little more than 60% of all agricultural lands enrolled in the state. Looking at our information. So we need to do something to increase that enrollment. A side note, within the Lake Okeechobee area, I know for irrigated areas, we have over 90% enrolled, and like in the 80s for all agricultural lands enrolled. But we need to improve. We need to grow our family, bring more people in. These people want to do things. They want to help out. They just need to know how and make it understandable for them. Oh, okay. Well, we've also leaned into GIS data and information about that. As I mentioned, the FSED program, you get the big thing we get out of that is water supply projections for agricultural use, but we also get land use information out of that. There's about 10 different data sets that are brought together. We evaluate those data sets, look at them, pull out things like slivers, state lands that aren't doing agriculture, little things like that. And that helps us pinpoint who we should go after, because before it was kind of like a free-for-all, like we'll just go after things. So we are kind of employing a more scientific method to go after folks. You can see in the background of the picture, we're running this idea right now in the 3 B maps that surround the Indian River Lagoon. Why did we pick the Indian River Lagoon? The enrollment there in the 3 B maps, there was only 95 people enrolled. That was a very small number. Also, there are water quality problems in the Indian River Lagoon. We've seen it in the news. And it's small enough for us to try something out. So we partnered up with a consulting firm to mail these out, confirm agricultural use, and then start enrolling people. In the last 3 months, we've tripled our enrollment. We've added my last data pool. We have 223 new enrollments on top of the 95 we already had. We have 533 more people who want to enroll. We're having a good response rate on our letters. And so we are making a systematic effort to try to go after people and enroll them. And because they do want to do the right thing, they do want to do BMPs. So we're going after them and trying to pick them off. There's going to be a point of diminishing returns with this area. Once we get to that point, we'll move on to the next set of 3 B maps and go after those folks. So it'll be really cool. Another way we're going to work with this to make it more efficient is all of our field staff got iPads 2 or 3 weeks ago. And the next week, we're all getting together and we're going to learn how to use Survey 123, because we have put all our BMP manuals on this application put out by Esri to enroll people. And so what I have found is that our field staff likes to be out in the field. They don't want to be tapping away at a computer in their office. And they were doing a lot of that because they had to put in parcel numbers and their name and all that. Well, all that will be automated through this application, and they can start enrolling people with that, and they just use their finger to draw on a map where the agricultural operation is occurring. That'll also give us a better information about how much agricultural acres are really out there. It'll automate things like putting in parcel numbers, putting in names, and it'll hopefully speed up that process. The next step, as we are almost done with our implementation verification, our IV visit application, that should be done this fall. We'll start rolling that out and get it going, and hopefully speed these things along, be able to enroll more people and more efficiently do our IV visits. The next big effort we're working on right now is updating all the BMP manuals. There are 6 big reasons why we're doing this. I don't know if you've ever tried to read one of these manuals. It is very long. They're average about 80 pages each. There's a lot of information in there. It's good information. But if I'm a producer, I need to understand what I need to do to be in compliance with the law. And so we are trying to make a concerted effort to make it very clear that this is what you have to do. We've split the manuals into 2 parts. There's a part A and a part B. Part A is what is expected of the producer. It has instructions on how to enroll, what to expect in an IV visit, and then it has a charted checklist of what each thing they need to do is. And so hopefully it is very clear to them what the expectation is to sign up for BMPs and then to implement them. Another reason we're updating these manuals is the manuals haven't been updated since the law surrounding them changed it in 2016 and then again in 2020. That required implementation verification visits and visiting every 2 years. So we wanted to put out there, this is what is expected of the producers. My favorite thing to talk about is eliminating practices that have nothing to do with water quality and water quantity. And my favorite thing to talk about is the dairy manual. It required, you're looking at me, I know. It required the producers to wash the udders of their cows. That is a great idea. It's healthy for the cows, it's healthy for the milk you drink, but it doesn't have anything to do with water quality or water quantity. So we need to take that out. Because we didn't want people to say, oh, you're not washing the udders, you're hurting water quality. That's a health concern for both the cow and the people drinking the milk, but it's not a water quality concern. So we're taking that out. We're taking practices out of there so they're not gotchas with people. We want to stick to our statutory directive and do those things. Fourth, most fun to do is update the practices to reflect the new technology we know about, new developments in agriculture. Some of these practices manuals are as old as 2008, so we need to, bring it up to speed and bring it in. We're also marrying the narrative. Like I said, it's an 80-page document. It's gone down to like 40, which is great. The narrative will be helpful, it will provide information about the practice, but it will not be a requirement. Part B is not required of the producer. It just says, here's the practice, here's where you can get some more information about how to do that. And then lastly, we're trying to make them all look uniform, follow the same format, be in the same order. If you go to page 5 on the equine manual, it's going to look a lot like the page 5 on the vegetable agronomic crop manual. I think page 5 is how you prepare for enrollment. But then if you want to learn about public records, what public records are exempt, that's page 9. We want that to be the same for everybody so they know where to look at, where to go to it. This is what it's going to look like. That's an example of our checklist. You could see we're calling those lovingly the purple practices. Purple practices are applicable to everybody, and then there's going to be green practices that'll be applicable to each commodity type that'll go with it. So there's green cattle practices in there. And we are on track right now to have most of them adopted by the end of the year. The only 2 that won't be done will be small farms and especially livestock. That's a completely new manual. We wanted to develop that manual because there's a lot of smaller producers out there that do a variety of things. There really wasn't a home for them to live, so we couldn't sign them up. So now they're going to have an opportunity to sign up. And also citrus. Citrus is very complicated, but we're planning on having both of those done in January. So we're moving right along. hitting our bumps, but it's going well. And I wanted to say I've really appreciated working with your staff and other water management district staff and DEP staff and a lot of other people like Farm Bureau is back there. They've been very helpful, and every comment I receive from them is not a negative. It's a way to make this product better. So it's been going pretty well. Fourth big goal is to implement regional projects. BMPs are great. They are stopping the source. They're reducing things, but there's still remnants of that nitrogen and phosphorus still out there, and BMPs don't capture everything. So we can implement regional projects, which you guys are doing beautifully, to collect water coming off the land, collect it, treat it, and put it back out there. There's a lot of producers that are interested in doing that. And surface waters, like here in South Florida, these big water projects are great ways to do that. In North Florida, it's going to look a little bit different. A lot of our issues are groundwater problems. So we need to look at stacking BMPs. Or I put a map up there that was made by the University of Florida about what practices would change, and they can model out what that would look like if we change the practices in this way or that way. Or maybe doing bioreactors or stream restoration projects. So doing these kind of projects, working with willing landowners is going to go a long way on top of doing those BMPs. I kind of did most of it. But another thing we're doing with data is we're collecting where did our previous projects occur. You can see here on a map, most of them occurred around Lake Okeechobee. That's a result of history and how things were funded. We started mapping it out so we know where things are, and we can share that information with people like Mrs. Reynolds and help her out and know what's out there. And we've worked with you guys already. You can see our ribbon cutting for the Four Corners out in Lee County that helps out the Caloosahatchee River. And we're looking to do more of these. We've started feasibility projects on them. And then over here on our right, you can see using different equipment in North Florida is going to help out with the water quality issue. This is a special way of planting and efficiently applying the fertilizer. And then lastly, we want to improve our relationships. Things weren't as great as they could be, so I want to do things like come to these meetings and present. And with all of our new BMP manuals, we are going out, once they're adopted, I've already started with the sod guys, the cattle guys have penciled me in on the calendar. We're going to go talk to them. It's like, all right, new manuals in place. What is the expectation of you? Because they need to have that communicated to them. We've worked well with the new chief science officer at DEP, coming up with common ideas, working on the blue-green algae task force. We just signed the NEPA implementation agreement with you guys last year. We're working hard to get this done. With our research, we're trying, and our research partners in the universities, we also want to make a repeatable process that makes it clear and puts it out there. What are research universities eligible for, and what will we help pay for? And so we've put that out on our website and made it clear what the application process will be. So we're doing a lot right now. It's a lot of fun. It's not without its pain. It's not without its bumps and bruises, but things are happening in our department. Do you guys have any questions or?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Kreger. Appreciate the presentation. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Mr. Steinle.
Wes, thank you very much. Obviously, really appreciate the partnership that we have with you guys at FDACS. And I think your predecessor came in maybe 2 years ago, and so this update's really, really helpful. I think I guess I'm curious about two things. So if there's about 12,000 producers in the state, just give or take what you said, right? I was under the impression that most of those 12,000 were enrolled, active in it. Your slide, one of the slides in terms of doing a lot more in terms of enrollment, gave me the impression that a lot fewer than I expected were enrolled. Do you, like, of the 12,000, how many are enrolled in?
Oh, the 12,000 is the number that's enrolled.
Okay.
That's how many, and so if you look at irrigated lands, we've emphasized getting the larger producers and the irrigated lands because those are obviously the biggest sources. We've gone after them. We've got 83% of all irrigated land in the state. But when you look at all agricultural lands, irrigated and dry land, it's about 60%. So we need to do better with that.
So the 60, you want to get as close to 100%.
Yep, that's the goal. Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
And then one of the things I remember from a couple of years ago is you go through this 2-year cycle of, I guess you would call it inspection. And one of the constraints, if I recall correctly, was resources, just staff levels. So are you now at a point, whether you've added staff or rejiggered it, where that 2-year cycle is occurring, effectively, or are there some gaps still in terms of resources?
We're around about 93% for doing IVs right now on their 2-year cycle. We have been able to supplement our staff and fill positions that were open. And also using this new Survey 123 product will hopefully speed that along so they can spend less time in the office and
Yeah.
more time doing the inspections.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Mr. Butler?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that I've got too many questions, but run back to slide 15 real quick. I gotta throw it up there. When you're redoing that dairy manual,
Yeah.
those 3 pictures are kind of nice pictures to keep on that dairy manual. Go back to the other one, back one. There you go. Those 3 pictures are good pictures. That happened to all be at my farm there. That's the Kissimmee River in the foreground on the right side there, yeah. so-
I'll take that in a note.
Yeah, but, no, we've done our stale. It's time to put somebody else on the cover. But, we don't need any more publicity. But can you talk a little bit, you talked about the, it's taken time to develop these manuals. And Wes, Gregor, can you talk about the process that goes in? You mentioned it briefly, but just the considerations that go in when developing the techniques or the BMP techniques that get put into a manual.
Of course, we've been doing research for a while with the universities and getting new information in. And then a while back, before my tenure, they started redrafting these manuals and put them in what I believe is a very logical, smart order and making a real checklist. And I've stepped in and given my 2 cents, because I've done a lot of rulemaking in my life, and said, let's organize it like this. So first, we sat down and made a draft. And then we need to work with the commodity groups and the producers and the environmental groups to say, all right, this is our draft. What do you think about that? So we've been going back and forth with them for several months to try to understand, do these get us to the goal we want, and are these achievable practices? I don't know if you guys read that book in the 90s, 10 Habits of a Highly Effective Person. They talk about setting goals, and BMPs are goals. They have to be written down, they have to be measurable, and they have to be achievable. So of course, we're writing them down, they're going in a manual, but then they need to be measurable. They need to have that specificity, and then they say, it's an on-off switch. Say, yes, no, you're doing this, click. No, you're not, click. But also, they need to be achievable. So yes, we all want clean water, but the producers also need to be able to do it. If I presented something that they couldn't do, I don't want to put them in a place for failure. So we're going back and forth with those commodity groups and saying, could you do this? Is this achievable? And working with the environmental groups and say, does this get us where we want to go? And looking at DEP and say, DEP, will this do what it needs to happen in the BMAP? And it's been a very intense process, but a very good one, I think. There's, we're not always going to agree, but we're always going to be agreeable on that. So we're doing that right now. Next step, we've published our notice of rule development for most of these. Let that go through. Then just now, we started routing our notice of proposed rule for approval. I have 7 of those in the hopper going up the chain to get approved. And once they're approved, I'm going to hit the button and publish those rules and let them go through the rulemaking process, and hopefully it'll be done by the end of the year. But it has taken a lot. It's been a monumental effort. I really appreciate all the work from my policy and planning staff, who's just kicked butt doing this. I'll give a shout out to Angela Chalette, who's quarterbacked this beautifully, and her work with her staff and with the field staff who've helped contribute to this has been nothing short of amazing. So it's been a lot.
All right, good. Yeah, so, if I could, Mr. Chairman, sorry, I got a couple more here. Fertilization rates.
Yes.
How are we coming on research, updating fertilization rates? I mean, it's I know from a producer standpoint that you got to feed your plants in order for them to grow. And if that feed's not there, it's not going to grow. But, I know we've learned over the period that maybe we've been over-applying some nutrients, or maybe under-applying. Recommendations aren't there. How are updated fertilization rates coming?
It's not my division, but I've been watching it very, very closely. And we have given our 2 cents into it also. It's going along well. University of Florida has got their, I think it must be like 20 projects. I don't remember the exact number of how many they have going on. And they're updating the rates to reflect the new practices that are out there. The rates that we see that are out there right now that are adopted by the research universities don't necessarily reflect the practices that we have tighter rows for our production, and just the way things are done differently to be more efficient with the resources producers have. That's being reflected in there. So some rates might go up, some might go down. It depends on what's happening in the program. There's also work on rates for things that didn't even exist before. So they're working on rates for commodities that are new to the state of Florida and putting that together. So it's coming along well. And I know this isn't really your question, but I also want to say one thing. Rates are important. It is important to understand that number, but you need to understand everything else that goes into the production for whatever commodity is. The plant is going to take what it takes to grow. But what happens after that when you put it down? If you're putting too much down, that's a problem. It's getting past the root zone. It's either seeking into the aquifer or it's going off and run off on surface waters. The question needs to be asked, are you putting too much down? And then if you're putting the right amount down, how is that being controlled? Are you using tailwater recovery? Are you using precision agriculture? Is there a bioreactor there? Those are the kind of questions we need to look at. It's one of the kind of things that happens in most environmental permitting is like, what's going in and what's coming out, and what steps in between are controlling that. And those are the questions we need to have. I will say with our new program and the new BMPs, it will be better to understand, yes, no, are they doing this right? But it's also going to be good to understand why they're not doing certain things. We've built into the application, like if you click in A, I want to know why the producer is not doing that thing. And we've made like 5 standard responses of why they might not be doing it. And then if it's something besides that, the field staff's going to have to put in like 100 characters why. And that's going to be good for understanding and updating the manuals the next time around to collect that information to understand what's happening and be able to say, all right, this works, but nobody's doing this one. And so make those kind of decisions.
One more, final question. All right. Wes, final question. I'll put you on the spot here. Are you getting all the resources you need out of the district?
Yes,
or is there
I am.
anything else that you need
really
from the district that we can provide that can help in helping improve the overall water quality in our state?
I think I've been working a lot with Mrs. Reynolds. It's been wonderful. Love working with Mr. Bartlett. It's been great. They've been helpful in providing that information. We need to do better on our end for collecting that information and sharing with them and making those informed decisions about where to go next.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Thanks very much, Mr. Gregory. Appreciate it. That was a great presentation. We're now going to move to our first public comment period. If you're here to comment on a specific agenda item, we ask that you hold your comment until we reach that item on our agenda. Public comment for consent agenda items are 13 on the agenda, and public comment for discussion agenda items will be heard after the presentation. The public has had an opportunity to provide written comments prior to this meeting. We did not receive any e-comments. Is there general public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We'll begin with Gil Smart, followed by Jake Foytik.
Well, I'm used to coming up here and saying good morning, good afternoon, folks. I'm Gil Smart, Policy Director with Friends of the Everglades. We were founded by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in 1969 to counter a major threat to the Everglades region, the proposed jet port in the Big Cypress area. Unfortunately, bad ideas seem to abound in the Everglades, and one of the worst we've heard in quite some time has surfaced in recent weeks. In fact, we understand the Southland Water Resource Project was supposed to be on this board's agenda in recent months, but has been withdrawn. but we're certain it's going to come back, if not as an item for you to approve, then as a legislative proposal. We believe this proposal to be a terrible idea in almost every way imaginable. It's being pitched as an essential water storage project, and we need more water storage in the EAA, don't get me wrong, but this appears to be first and foremost a rock mining operation. And the timescale to mine the land would be in the decades. Only then would we get the promised water storage. And what good would all this added water storage be when the district is still struggling to meet court order water quality standards despite billions of taxpayers' dollars spent? How is it that the water stored in this hole in the Everglades would be clean? Might the project contaminate the aquifer? This isn't Everglades restoration, this is exploitation. This is another nail in the coffin of the Everglades. And this is about corporate greed. This is about the profits of a few billionaires. This is about landowners, Florida Crystals, and U.S. Sugar trying to rig the system to their advantage. And here I seem to remember that the last time we were looking for land for water storage in the EAA, we couldn't find any willing sellers. Maybe the price just wasn't right then, and it is now. This isn't the first time rock mining has been proposed in the Everglades, but the people of Florida do not want this. They want the Everglades to be saved and restored, not destroyed, so billionaire corporations can make yet another buck. So the answer to this proposal, if it comes before you again, must be absolutely not. No more moving the goalposts. If you let this through, we expect a firestorm will result, and it's one you guys are going to have to deal with. So we hope you don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smart. We'll hear next from Jake Foytik, followed by Newton Cook.
Good afternoon. Jake Foytik with the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. I've mentioned before, but to reiterate, Florida Farm Bureau is the state's largest general ag organization. We're a grassroots nonprofit comprised of over 130,000 member families who represents and speaks on behalf of all agriculture, large and small, throughout Florida. It's that time of year again, bring up great news regarding phosphorus reductions in the EAA. Contrary to the rhetoric that only one crop grows in the EAA, a multitude of crops grow there, including sugarcane, vegetables, fruit, sod, and rice. Crop rotations are implemented on many farms as well. Additionally, South Florida crop production feeds up to 180 million Americans all up and down the East Coast during the winter months, bringing huge economic impacts and tens of thousands of jobs to South Florida. This past year, overcoming challenges, including an El Nino winter and adhering to one of the most strictly monitored farming areas in the country, South Florida's farmers announced another landmark in their on-farm efforts to improve water quality. Over this past year, farmers have achieved a 46% annual reduction in phosphorus, continuing to vastly exceed the 25% reduction required under the Everglades Forever Act, and bringing the total annual average reduction to 57% since the program began in 1996. These reductions are not attained on accident. They are accomplished by implementing science-based best management practices that were methodically developed and intentionally implemented and include a whole host of water conservation, water quality, and water resource protection practices. These BMPs are designed specifically to reduce water use and nutrient use, reduce sediment loss, and provide clean water to flow south out of the EAA. In the past year, water quality monitors have registered drastic reductions in phosphorus levels from when it enters the EAA to when it leaves. So I'd like to thank the district for monitoring and reporting on this key component of Everglades restoration. And thank you to the EAA farmers who have worked relentlessly to not only ensure that these water quality goals are met, but far exceeded for the benefit of all of South Florida. I want to mention too, especially after West's timely presentation, that's not just EAA farmers that are implementing these BMPs. Bona fide farmers inside and outside BMAPs are continuing to implement science-based best management practices, providing environmental benefits, reducing water and nutrient use, and providing wildlife habitat and green space. They're doing this all while delivering food security for our nation's safe, abundant, and affordable food supply. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Foytik. We'll hear next from Newton Cook, followed by Kelly Cox.
Good afternoon, Newton Cook, United Waterfalls of Florida. Couple of things. I just spent a couple of days with the Department of Forestry State, and I got to put in some good plugs. It was Operation Outdoor Freedom and the Wounded Warrior hunts on the SDAs, and There was a gentleman there who was on the hunt last year, and it almost brought tears to my eyes listening to him talk about the wonderful time he had. And it's just great, great things that the district does here. The first thing, our recreation meeting this month is going to be October 28th. We changed it. We lost two of our speakers, I think, and so we'll do it in October, no problem. I want to thank the district for and James for taking us on the STA tour, where we're going to put the parking numbers tour where all the different people come in to hunt. It's a problem every year because the cattails are taking the place over. We struggle, but we're going to be okay this year. I have asked for one thing, and on STA 2 Cell 8, the north end is incredible habitat. It's only in the top 1/3 of the cell. It's about a mile down through cattails, and there's a pumping plant being built there. So we don't need to close the whole cell because there's something going on a half mile away. And we also have other cells that we put no hunting zones in. So all we need to do, open the north 1/3 of that cell, put no hunting on all the rest of it. What that does, it gives us about 8 spots that we could get people out there that normally would be crowded up. Very important. Glad to hear Drew mention projects north of the lake, BMPs north of the lake. I don't think I have to tell you that I've been speaking about 20 years about what are we doing north of the lake. And it's beginning to move. The last board and this board has seen the importance. Problem is, of course, is the new reservoir, God bless you, I stood right here and spoke for EAA2 reservoir in 2003. It'll be ready in 2033, 30 years. So when we talk about these reservoirs, we're talking about many, many years in advance. They don't help today. Worst thing I want to talk about, Bassmasters just took Lake Okeechobee off the top 10 bass lakes in North America. Do you know what that means? Do you know what this group, the FWC and the Corps of Engineers have just accomplished? They have destroyed Lake Okeechobee to the point that Bassmasters has taken away the ranking that they've had forever. Disaster. Self-inflicted with Lonesome. Who told you what Lonesome was going to do? Not even a storm. And the lake's a turbid mess. I would like to see the old lake, old rack, although we can't do that again, type of committee established
wrap
with
up your
one
comments.
objection. This is my last thing. We need to have something on Lake Okeechobee restore as per Lonesome in the Corps. We need a meeting 3 times a year with the stakeholders and the agencies talking about one thing. What are we going to do to get Lake Okeechobee back on that Bassmasters list? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. We'll hear next from Kelly Cox, followed by Mark Perry.
Good afternoon, governing board members. Kelly Cox, Director of Everglades Policy with Audubon, Florida. I was really interested in that BMP presentation, and I want to thank Mr. Gregory for it. It's a really, really important program, and that's what my comments are going to focus on today. Since the 1980s, we have been addressing the issue of phosphorus loading into Lake Okeechobee through a variety of plans. The SWIM plan, the Lake Okeechobee Protection Plan, the BMAP plans. And despite these efforts, phosphorus loads have consistently remained around 500 tons a year, showing very little signs of progress. And of course, that leads to algal blooms, right? So the blooms vary in severity and in size, but nonetheless, they are impactful and they impact the lake and surrounding ecosystems. And I think this is recognized across the state. We're seeing movement toward addressing wastewater nutrient pollution, stormwater nutrient pollution, and now's the time that we really need to double down on agricultural nutrient loading. We have a lot of good opportunities to do this. We can increase water storage capacity north of the lake, and Drew talked about that with LOCAR and other projects that are moving forward. We'll hear more about that with the dispersed water management discussion later in the agenda today too. We know that we need to store at least 1 million acre-feet of water north of Lake Okeechobee to meaningfully reduce the amount of nutrients that's getting into the lake. We need to implement more of these regional projects. We heard of a few of them, and we need to really put our foot on the gas moving forward with more of these regional projects. And we need to enhance best management practices. We need to strengthen the cost-sharing programs. We need more incentives. We need to place a greater emphasis on nutrient management, ensuring that the more nutrients a landowner is applying, the more water quality practices they're required to adopt. And we need more and stronger water management practices as a component of the BMP process. So these are really critical pieces to a very complex puzzle, and we really urge the district to continue to prioritize these actions to support our collective goals of restoring the health of Lake Okeechobee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cox. We'll hear next from Mark Perry, followed by Captain Daniel Andrews.
Afternoon, Governing Board, Mark Perry, Florida Oceanographic. My kind of comments are, I appreciate the incentive and information by Mr. Gregory, particularly on BMPs. And as we've been following this even since 2019, when this board got a kind of orientation of BMPs from FDACS, it was about accomplishing perhaps as much as 25% reduction, whereas the rest of that reduction has to come from BMAPs and other kind of implementation of other programs, regional projects within the watersheds. But I think that Mr. Gregory's presentation is great. We now have a more active, more robust kind of information going forward to try to enroll more people in BMPs. I did put out, and I appreciate the NEEP updates particularly. I know that you've kind of postponed the NEEP workshop for this month and put it off to next month, but perhaps also the BMPs, which are BMAPs, I'm sorry, are going to be updated too by FDEP are coming in. I did pass out this one kind of handout of the 3 watersheds in the Northern Everglades Estuaries Protection Program. And obviously those are kind of showing you from Mr. Reynolds' presentation back in 2022 that the amounts of total phosphorus and total nitrogen loading in all 3 of these watersheds are 2 to 5 times higher than the TMDLs that are coming in. You just heard about 500 metric tons a year coming down from the Lake Okeechobee watershed. So I appreciate if you can continue to look at, when you look at NEEP updates, bring this back, bring this information. Stuart Van Horn presented it to you back in 2019, and then at Mr. Reynolds again in 22. This information is based on those water year averages for 5-year water averages. It's very important that this board and the public kind of understand where we actually are. There's a lot of monitoring going on, and the district does an excellent job in monitoring all these basins and sub-basins, so we can see exactly how are the big regional projects working, how are BMAPs working, how are BMPs working within these regions in the watershed. The more we know how they're working or not working, the better we can focus our implementation of trying to address the pollution runoff in the watershed itself, rather than waiting downstream to impact the water bodies. To give you that too. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that, right now there's about 4,300 CFS coming into the St. Lucie estuary. There's a lot of basin runoff from both sides and there's about 9,000 CFS going to the Caloosahatchee. Both these are multiple times over the targets and the necessary for the recover targets as far as damaging to the estuary. We're doing all we can. We've got to do more, all we can to retain and detain that water within the watersheds before it runs off through the canals, C44, C23, 24 in this case, into the estuaries to meet those recover targets and get the estuaries back to health. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. We'll hear next from Captain Daniel Andrews and then switch over to our Zoom participants.
Good afternoon, board and staff. We appreciate the opportunity for the public comment. I'm Captain Daniel Andrews, co-founder and executive director of Captains for Clean Water. Here today to go on the record regarding the Southland Reservoir project. There are several serious potential concerns we have about how it could impact restoration projects such as the immediately adjacent EAA reservoir and STA. We really don't know what those impacts may look like at this point, other than decades of rock mining, which is not mentioned in the proposal that has since been withdrawn. We don't know the pros and cons of it, and thought it was important to go on the record with that. It's worth noting that two of the parties involved with this, the landowners, are actually suing the operations of the EAA reservoir right next to it, yet the proposal was outlined that this was some type of water resource project. So the attorneys they hired look very expensive, judging by their website. And again, it just raises questions. Why would we be building a project if they're suing one that has a similar stated purpose to this one? Most importantly, and why I chose to drive over here today, was the withdrawal letter asks for the letter of project identification, which we believe is really the linchpin in this process and potentially one of the only things that's needed to bring this project forward. The importance of this letter cannot be overstated. This governing board has done a tremendous job with transparency, and we appreciate the continued transparency as is stated in the withdrawal letter from Phillips and Jordan, that they intend to continue moving this project forward. The last thing I would leave you with is just asking, if we had this land and we're going to build an Everglades restoration project on it, what would that look like? Would it look anything like the rock mine which has been proposed? I've attended many meetings on Everglades restoration in the last 8.5 years, and all the projects, whether they're the EAA reservoir, the C44, which by the way is leaking, which I don't think was in the plans initially. So it just shows, if they're excavating and blasting and whatever they may be doing here, could that impact this reservoir, this STA? But anyway, these other projects, they look very different. They're above ground reservoirs or they're STAs. They're not holes in the ground that are a byproduct of a mining operation. So I would just ask you all to keep that in mind and make sure that we're looking forward to the future of Florida, what's best for Everglades restoration and best for future generations, rather than potentially making another big mistake, which Everglades restoration is essentially fixing mistakes from the past. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and appreciate your concern.
Thank you, Captain Andrews. We'll hear next from Kyle Archaki on Zoom, followed by Ryan Rossi. Mr. Archaki, please unmute your mic.
How you doing? First, thank you for making this meeting available on Zoom. I wanted to comment on the high water conditions in Water Conservation Area 3. Right now, it's over the closure level as the FWC sets for recreational use, and it's probably going to be closing in the near future. I just ask that you guys do anything possible to get that water under 41 and help it not stack up in Water Conservation Area 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Archaki. We'll hear next from Ryan Rossi. Mr. Rossi, please unmute your mic.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Okay. Good morning, or sorry, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for the opportunity to comment. I've recently noticed that there have been some new reports that our state might be facing a long-term water shortage crisis. It's certainly not the first time the alarm bells have sounded on this issue for the state of Florida. And I think that, sometimes we get these rainier months and the urgency is somewhat forgotten. But there are some factors at play that I think we need to pay attention to, a few being that a shortage potential is heightened, number one, by an increasing population, which is showing no sign of slowing down. We've got a new lake management strategy that I think to some degree has sidestepped some critical water supply concerns. And of course, changes in weather. It's a fact that we're going to have drought-like conditions again. I think that's all but a certainty. And look, we as South Floridians, we've lived through periods of growth before. We've lived through the large-scale restoration projects and tons of challenging weather conditions. But during those periods, South Floridians always had the confidence that their water was legally protected through mechanisms like the Savings Clause. And I think that many people are forgetting that the Savings Clause has been core policy for our region. It's been a legal protection ensuring that our area stakeholders, and that includes South Florida residents, are guaranteed water supply rights regardless of external conditions or management plans. And it's almost unthinkable to me that with a combination of a booming population, unpredictable weather, at the time when 7 million South Floridians most need protections to their water is the time when that kind of legal protection has all but disappeared. So simply put, and I've said this many, many, many times at these meetings and meetings all over South Florida, This is a recipe for a shortage crisis that I believe is completely avoidable. And without common sense management to our water, with all of these different variables at play, it is creating a much more complicated and potentially dangerous supply crisis in the years to come. The bottom line is, I hope water supply protections that we've been used to somehow remain an essential part of how we proceed in determining how to best manage all of our water going forward. It is very, very important, and I'm not the only one that notices. It's many people that are starting to raise awareness to this. So please keep that into consideration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rossi. We'll hear next from Nyla Pipes. Ms. Pipes, please unmute your mic.
Sound check.
We hear you.
Fantastic. Nyla Pipes, One Florida Foundation. I can't follow Ryan without echoing his concerns about our water supply, not just for agriculture, but for the millions of South Floridians who live south of Lake Okeechobee. I think that it's been a real struggle to communicate how important the lake itself is regarding water supply. So I do look forward to this afternoon's conversations. The other thing is, I want to say thank you for all of the work on the rest of IRL South. I have spent over a decade now talking about how important IRL South is to our St. Lucie River. And sometimes it felt like I was yelling into a vacuum, but we're really making progress. And that's a big, big deal, because north of the lake and in our own watershed is where the majority of our nutrients come from. Of course, from Lake Okeechobee itself, but not from the south, as evidenced by the news of the work that is being done with the BMPs to the south of the lake and the wonderful work that our EAA farmers are doing. Whether we like it or not, they were factored in as a part of our treatment plan south of that lake. It's beyond time to work on projects to the north and in our St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee estuaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pipes. Mr. Chairman, we have no additional general public comment.
Well, thank you all very much for your comments. Let's see, we're going now to board comment, right? Yeah, sorry. Lost my place. Mr. Steinle just stepped out, so Mr. Butler, that means you're it.
I'm ahead, all right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things. To begin with, appreciate I was driving home about 2 weeks ago and thinking to myself, hey, my appointment's up. I've got about 5 loose ends that I haven't finished up, 5 phone calls I hadn't returned. I don't have to worry about them tomorrow. And then that email came in 15 minutes later. But I just want to say congratulations to Charlie. Wagner's not with us today, but at least we've maintained a University of Florida advantage on the board over Wagner. Maybe not on the football field, but I wish he was here to have a little fun. Been several meetings that have occurred over the last month, and I just want to recognize some of those meetings. The district held a Lower Kissimmee Basin Stormwater Treatment Area open house in Okeechobee, held 2 sessions, and both sessions were well attended, and I think there were still some residents were certainly showed up with some concerns, and I think staff was able to answer a lot of those questions, and we had good productive meetings there. So again, I appreciate, and EIP was also there, and I appreciate both the district and EIP being there to talk about and answer concerns. I look forward to seeing the updates as we move forward with the draft design early next year. Also, the Corps is out with their Kissimmee River headwaters revitalization scoping meetings. The NEPA process, and held one in Bassinger, just a couple miles up from my home, and then held another meeting in Kissimmee. I would say that most of the comments from the lower end of the Kissimmee River had to do with operations at S65D, and just a lot of homeowners and landowners concerned there. And then up in Kissimmee, Again, most of it was on flood protection and making sure that the Corps and the district can provide flood protection as those lake levels are raised. So we'll see more. Look forward to seeing the plan that comes out for the water control plan and how the discharge operations are modeled and what goes into it to get up to 54. It was a good reminder to me that when we talk about raising KCH up to 54 feet, that by the time you cross 53 foot high, and again, I'm using old datum, it's going to be hard to get off of this NGVD datum. But as we cross that 53, getting to 54, we're going to be sending a pile of water down the river when that happens. It's not like it's going to be stagnant water sitting there, is what I would expect to see in the water control plan. So I think that when that realization finally gets out to folks, they realize water is already heading down the river. It's not like it's just holding it, and then at 54, we turn it loose. So again, look forward to seeing that, and that realization, I think, is helping when you explain it to people. County Coalition for Responsible Management of Lake Okeechobee, the estuaries, Lake Worth. Had 2 retirements off that group this go round. The chair and vice chair will be leaving. Chair Carson Turner, Vice Chair Doug Smith from Martin County. Both those individuals, I got up in public comment and spoke, thanked them for their service. Both those individuals have been a great part of that county coalition in terms of bringing that group of county commissioners together. In their reports, there's a lot of discussion on the septic to sewer projects that each of those counties are working on implementing, as well as some other water resource projects that help water quality. But wanted to recognize those 2 individuals, KT and Doug Smith there, and thank them for their service again. I guess that was it. I just went through all my notes there. Had fertilization rates. That was with Wes. So yeah, that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butler. Mr. Steinle?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Gil and Daniel about their comments on the proposed reservoir, which has been withdrawn. I guess without commenting on, because we don't know, this is a concept, the viability of a plan, I think I just want to make the point broadly in terms of unsolicited proposals, which is that the district has an interest, well, an obligation by statute to accept unsolicited proposals, but also an interest in terms of hearing about projects that might make sense. Some will not, some might. What I don't want to do is deter the private sector from proposing solutions that may be at a significant cost advantage and time advantage. So I'm not again saying this is one of those that would meet that criteria or not. I would like to just broadly say, because of the comments that have been out there, and district is not in the business of issuing mining permits, obviously, but I don't want to dissuade public interest in providing solutions and ideas to objectives that we're all interested in and fighting for. More storage, better water quality. Some of these projects will work, some will absolutely not. But I don't want to keep that door closed, and I don't want anybody to think that consideration means approval, too. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Steinle. Mr. Bergeron, you have any comments?
I sure do, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to give a little update on the Everglades Operation Restoration Endangered Species Recovery Workshop. Very productive. I want to thank the tribe, the Miccosukee, for hosting this. And I want to thank Drew and John Micknick and our staff for all the preparation that took place in order to have a productive meeting. And the Everglades is a global system. And it's so important that as we proceed forward with Everglades restoration, that we keep that in mind. And I think the Tamiami Trail and projects that are left to be completed to implement SERP, modified water delivery, delivering 1,500,000 acre feet of water at an average rain year and up to 2.5 million acre feet of water in a heavy rain year is so important to the benefit of the Everglades, our environment, our plant communities, our wildlife, and obviously that quantity of water protects our environment. A lot of things has happened since 1915 when we started the Tamiami Trail. Took 13 years to complete it, completed in 1928. And a lot of things has happened on both sides of the road. Extreme high water events in the Central Everglades, drowning more than 5,000 fur-bearing animals. And then obviously Everglades National Park with lack of water. In 2015, we lost 50,000 acres of seagrass. So it's important that we remove the barriers that remain to move water south. And obviously completion of the Tamiami Trail. We had DOT there. Drew and myself had conversations regarding being able to keep the L29 at 8.5 after they switched traffic onto the new 2 lanes. At that point in time, they wouldn't need to be protecting the old 2 lanes because they're going to be rebuilt. So we hope we get cooperation there. We got to make sure that the airboat tours that are on the south side of the road are modifying and compatible with water delivery and SERP. We had a lot of discussions about the Cape Sable sparrow with captive breeding, relocating to habitats compatible with modified water delivery and SERP. Extremely important. Our staff, under John's leadership, put together 20 years of water flow. And when you look at the dividing line, which established our science 24 years ago, 60% of the water flowing south was on the east side of Shark River Slough and 40% on the west side. They put a chart together. Interesting enough, there was only 2 years in 20 years that water exceeded the estimated quantity of the 40% on the west side, which means that we're delivering close to what the 40% is based upon the infrastructure that's there. The 2 years that it went above was Wilma in 2005 and Irma in 2017, which were 100-year acts of God, severe raining, hurricane. So as we continue to go forward, we got to make sure that not only the road is expedited and completed, but that we remove any other obstacles that would not allow water by gravity to rehydrate Everglades National Park and stop seagrass from dying in Florida Bay. And I think we had a very good meeting. I think we all agreed. I think U.S. Fish and Wildlife was there. They made a commitment that we're not going to alter the natural flow of SERP. So I think we had a good meeting. We need to prioritize the Blue Shanty, which can come up at our next Everglades Task Force meeting. And I just want to thank all the stakeholders for being there. And we can move this water for the best interest of the global system. And That's about it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron, and thank you, Mr. Bergeron, for spearheading that and pushing for that meeting. I think it was very important, and thanks for the update. Ms. Meads?
I just want to say what a great executive director report today, Drew. Thank you so much. I remember 5 years ago when we dreamed of this kind of news. So thank you so much. That's my only comment, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Meads. Colonel Roman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to first start off by congratulating Mr. Martinez and Mr. Butler for being reappointed by the governor to the board. I know the date got close, but great to be able to serve with you going forward. So thank you for that and congratulations. Also, coming up on our consent agenda, we're going to be voting on item number 16, which is releasing 780 acres. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to highlight this item on what is a good news story. The district has deemed that the mitigation of 780 acres was successful under the permit for the Isles of Collier Preserve. And this land now is going to be transferred pending our vote to Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve for management and maintenance. And of course, that's the DEP Organization Office of Resilience and Coastal Resiliency. So that's a good news story. Again, it just shows what we can do when all of us are working together. So I just wanted to flag that for you. And that's all I have.
Well, thanks very much for that. Appreciate it. And I'll just wrap up by saying I agree with Ms. Meads. Drew, that was a great report, and I'd like to thank the Army Corps, Secretary Connor and General Spellman for both stepping up and signing those two really important documents to keep things moving for north of the lake and WERP. Now it's just up to Congress to figure WERDA out, whether it's WERDA 24 or 25, I don't know yet, because it seems to be a little bit of a moving target. But I'd encourage Congress to take that up because this is really important to us, and we're making great strides here. The $1.63 billion budget is sort of mind-boggling. It was not that big when we started, but when you tell us what we're doing, I can understand why it's that big. So congratulations, it's a lot of projects. And I know we used to keep track, and I don't know if you're still keeping track, but we were at 70 at one point. I don't know if we're well above that, or yeah, I figure it's more than that. But it's just one of these days you'll have to update me again on that. And I want to thank Wes Gregory very much for making the trip today and giving us a great presentation. And I encourage you not to wait 2 years. Maybe we can do it every year and keep making good progress forward. And as far as Mr. Martinez, Mr. Butler, congratulations, Mr. Butler. No rest for the weary. You have to return those phone calls. And I would encourage the Senate to act favorably on your nominations. We'll move now to consent. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Jeez. The guy who just got renominated and I absolutely forgot about, Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got no comments other than to say that look forward to working with all of you for 4 more years and continue the work that we started some years ago.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you too, even if I can't remember you, but I will do better. I apologize. Moving on to consent. Let's see. Any comments on consent? Or does any board member want to move any consent to discussion first? Hearing none, are there any public comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We'll hear first from Kelly Cox, followed by Mark Perry.
Good afternoon again, governing board members. Kelly Cox on behalf of Audubon, Florida. I want to express our very strong support for the dispersed water management program and the efforts outlined in number 20 on the agenda today. We're very supportive of the education, outreach, and water monitoring services agreement with Archbold and Buck Island Ranch. That program has been really meaningful, or rather that organization does really meaningful work. And we've been a partner with the ranch on a number of different efforts throughout the years, great partners. And so we're really encouraged to see that moving forward. In fact, Audubon has developed a GIS tool, our wetland evaluation tool, to help identify the most effective potential areas for dispersed water projects. And so we're really excited to see this moving forward because we know dispersed water management has so many different benefits that will improve the health of our ecosystems, from the Caloosahatchee to the St. Lucie and of course the Lake Okeechobee watersheds. So we're excited to see that moving forward. And we are looking forward to the data sharing components of this agreement as well, as we think that we'll learn a lot from Archbold and the work that they do. In addition, I just wanted to chime in and acknowledge our support for the grant agreements in item number 31. These resiliency grants are a reflection of a huge amount of work by Dr. Carolina Moran and her team, and I just want to recognize that this is a really, really positive step forward. This funding is going to help projects start to move forward, including some blended components of projects, which we're excited to see, which blends gray and green infrastructure, and we'd like to see more of that, especially in our highly urban areas that are so flood prone and vulnerable to sea level rise and climate impacts. So just want to voice our support for that, and thank you all on the staff for the great work to bring that funding home.
Thank you, Ms. Cox. We'll hear next from Mark Perry.
Afternoon again, Governing Board, Mark Perry, Florida Oceanographic. I also want to echo the support for item number 20, Dispersed Water Management Program. We've been watching this develop over the years, and these programs are obviously working within watersheds like the St. Lucie Estuary and those watersheds. We've seen them very effective and very much working. And in fact, they're so important that the district staff brings them up every periodic science call that we have with it to understand the capacities and how much we are storing and how much capacity we have within the dispersed water program to storage. So kind of the more the better. This helps with not only the whole Northern Everglades and Estuaries Protection Plan, because it helps with the, implement what we want to do with BMPs and BMAPs to try to get more storage and treatment within the watershed. And I think it's just really great that finally this commitment will help over the next couple of years for kind of get this independent monitoring of these projects. We kind of know they're successful and work on that success as far as storage. We can actually crunch numbers that way. But to really crunch numbers and understand the full capacity and what they do for not only storage but water treatment is really important. And I think it's really admirable that we engage this group to be able to move that kind of forward. So all more dispersed water management projects are really good. We've talked about them in other parts of the, other parts of the watershed as well. They will work to help get us some storage and capacity we need without huge, large, regional, very expensive, long-time regional projects. These smaller dispersed water management projects are really helpful in doing what we need to do within the watershed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. Chairman, we have no hands raised on Zoom.
Great, thank you for your comments. Are there any comments by the board on this? And if not, I'll take a motion.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve consent. If there's no further discussion, we'll call that question. Mr. Steinle? Yes. I'm going to vote yes. Mr. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Martinez? I'll come back to Mr. Martinez. Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Meads?
Yes.
Roman?
Yes.
Mr. Martinez? All right, that passes unanimously. We'll now move to item 34, which is our discussion agenda and the Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan update with Mr. Elsner.
Hi there, good afternoon. Mark Elsner, Water Supply Bureau Chief here at the district, and it's my privilege today to be here to present you the 23-24 Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan update for your consideration of approval. You may recall in July, Nancy Demonstrati gave an overview summarizing the document including a revised Lake Okeechobee MFL recovery strategy. Since then, we've been busy. We've held a third stakeholder workshop. We had a public comment and review period that ended August 7th. We received those comments, reviewed them, and made changes to the document where appropriate. Last week, we posted the final draft of the plan and sent an email to stakeholders letting them know that's available. You've seen this before, but I wanted to go over some of the plan requirements. First, the map on the right shows our 5 planning areas. We're talking about the Lower East Coast today, but Lake Okeechobee touches 4 of our planning areas, and we formally address Lake Okeechobee in the Lower East Coast plan. Some of the requirements for a water supply plan: 20-year planning period is a minimum, issue identification and evaluation. We need to include local and regional projects and strategies on how we're going to meet those demands. And we also have to review the prevention and recovery strategies associated with the minimum flow and level and update those if necessary. Our Lower East Coast planning area includes Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade counties, and portions of Monroe, Collier, and Hendry County. There are also Seminole Tribe of Florida and Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida reservations in the planning area. Using information, and our planning horizon is 2021 to 2045. Using information from the University of Florida Bureau of Economic and Business Research, also known as BEBR, we're projecting population to increase by about 17%, or about 1 million people in the Lower East Coast, which represents about 25% of the state's population, to about 7.3 million people by 2045. Using information from and Wes just talked about this, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, FSED, which is the Florida statewide agricultural irrigation demand geodatabase, which is a very helpful source of information for agricultural projections. We are projecting, and they're projecting, agriculture to remain stable at about over 550,000 acres of irrigated acres in the Lower East Coast, and a slight decrease of about 2%. With those inputs, our gross water demands are going to be increasing by about 11%, or 200 million gallons a day, to about 2.1 billion gallons a day of average use. I added this slide to address Ms. Mead's comment in July about population projections and did we get it right. And this is the 4 population projections from our last 4 Lower East Coast water supply plans. They're based on the University of Florida's Bureau of Economic and Business Research, the state demographers. And with each of these, we use the best available information at the time. But I think this shows, it's a testament of why we need to update our water supply plans every 5 years to stay current. For example, in our 2005-2006 plan, and the first dot on each of these lines is actually the population estimate, and then the following dots are projections. But during that time period, we were having explosive growth, very robust economy. In the early 2000s, we had a very optimistic, BEBR had a very optimistic outlook on growth in the future. It didn't foresee the recession in 2007, 2009, but had us going from about 5 million people to about 7.3 million people. Come the next plan update in 2013, and the recession, we did not realize that growth. And in fact, we were only at 5.7 million people. And then projections from that point. So you can see that every 5 years, these economic and growth factors are always in flux, and we need to capture that with our new plans. For this This plan is the yellow, and we're projecting a population of about 6.1, increasing to about 7.2. And coincidentally, that is almost the same projection that we did in our 2005-2006 plan. All right, with every plan, we identify considerations or issues. With this Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan, some of those considerations were that increases in the surficial aquifer system, in this case mainly the Biscayne Aquifer, are limited due to potential harm to natural systems as well as saltwater intrusion. Recognizing that there are regulatory limitations on surface water availability from the lake as well as its connected water bodies. Environmental water needs. We have a lot of SERP projects going on in this area that will be addressing those. But with the limitations on fresh water from the superficial and surface water, there's a more dependence on alternative water supplies, reclaimed water, and the brackish Floridan aquifer, such that we need to be looking at the long-term availability and sustainability of the Floridan aquifer system. And then climate change and sea level rise needs to be continued to look at, and its potential impacts on water supply in the future. As I indicated, we did review the Lake Okeechobee MFL recovery strategy and concluded it needed to be updated. The proposed strategy consists of 4 components: environmental enhancement, which involves native vegetative planning as well as other environmental projects while the lake is low. Regulatory criteria for consumptive use permits in the form of the Lake Okeechobee service area restricted allocation rule. And we looked at that and analyzed it and concluded at this point that we cannot increase allocations from Lake Okeechobee until additional projects are constructed. We also have water short restrictions as needed. And those 3 are consistent with what the last recovery strategy included. The 4th component is capital projects, and those were updated as part of this and include the Lake Okeechobee Component A Reservoir, Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project, Central Everglades Planning Project, and the A2 Reservoir and STA, and SERP Component A, which is really critical, that recognizes that the LOSM needs to be updated as these major projects come online. We received really good comments from a host of commenters, local governments, utilities, agencies, as well as others. We took those comments. We've met with many of the commenters to understand those comments and ensure that the plan addresses their issues and needs. And these comments actually made the plan better as we address those. As a summary of the comments that we received, there were several regarding LOSM concerning water supply availability and being able to meet the needs of the area. Another area of LOSM that was commented on was the water control plan and operational flexibility, understanding that within LOSM and Zone D is a pretty big zone and that it's going to be operated the way it was modeled. Excuse me. So the Army Corps of Engineers Water Control Plan includes operational flexibility to address the multiple objectives of Lake Okeechobee and balancing those. The EIS associated with LOSM is based on water supply performance improvements, or showed water supply performance improvements over LORS 08. And what we're going to do is provide operational guidance to the Army Corps of Engineers on a weekly basis and use available storage and conveyance capacity to achieve water supply performance consistent with the state's water supply authority. We also received comments on the Lake Okeechobee MFL and recovery strategy and the importance of constructing these SERP projects and non-SERP projects, and especially north of the lake, and capturing that water before it enters the lake and introduce it to the lake on a more regular basis instead of peaks and valleys. water conservation and support for water conservation going forward. And also a common comment from the utilities was the increased water needs for treatment of the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS you may have heard. This is affecting much of our water industry. EPA has just passed maximum contaminant levels for that in April. So our utilities are now evaluating the impact of that on their systems and what their next steps are. One of the common treatment systems to remove PFAS from water that's been identified as reverse osmosis. That's going to take more water because of the inefficiencies or the water loss through the treatment process. So that'll be evaluated over the next 5 years, and we'll bring that back in the 5-year plan update. In conclusion, the plan concludes that the future water supply and ecosystem needs of the region can continue to be met through 2045. However, that can't be, we just can't sit back. We got to keep our foot on the accelerator, and that's going to include appropriate management, conservation, and implementation of the projects in this update. That includes projects by utilities, as well as implementation of the SERP and other regional projects as part of MFL prevention and recovery strategies. The planning doesn't stop here. After your approval, it triggers 18 months time clock for local governments to update their water facility work plans. And these work plans are the local government's plan on how they're going to meet their need over the next 10 years. It identifies their population and the projects that are needed to meet the water needs of their community or local government. We also receive annual progress reports from those utilities on those projects each November. And we've developed, it's called the What's Up database that allows them to provide that to us electronically. Before I get into the staff recommendation, I do want to recognize many district staff that have contributed to this. And these plans, as you can imagine, touch a lot of business areas within the district and a lot of input from a lot of people. So this was truly a team effort and has taken thousands of hours to do this and do it right. I do want to give special recognition to Nancy Demonstrati, our plan manager, and Tom Colios, our water supply section leader, for the dedicated effort over the last couple of years in seeing this through. So with that, staff's recommendation is to enter a final order approving the 23-24 Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan update.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Elsner. Do we have public comment on this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We'll hear first from Kelly Cox, followed by Mark Perry.
Hi, everyone. Kelly Cox, Audubon, Florida. Last one, I promise. Today, talking about the Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan, I want to acknowledge the great work of the water supply planning team. This has been a big lift and a long time coming, and Audubon's been with them every step of the way, coordinating with district staff to elevate some of our priorities for this update. Overall, we really wanted to focus on conservation in the plan. There are a lot of increased demands for water supply that we anticipate with growing population and threats to water supply. And so we really want to focus on conservation measures that can provide multiple bottom line benefits for our water supply. Also, I want to reiterate some of our comments from our written comments. We had focused on reclaimed water, advanced wastewater treatment, and the need to have very strict standards for those when we are moving them into our water supply planning process. We want to be sure that as we are taking on this Goliath effort to reduce nutrient loads, we're also considering that as we are engaging in the water supply planning process. Likewise, I think that I've said this enough today, but storage is a really important piece of this too. Having the capacity to recharge our aquifers while providing flood control is a really, really important part of this process as well. Finally, the plan states that demand is projected to increase by 208.81 million gallons per day by 2045. I think that's right. Caitlin sent this to me, so okay, I think that's right. largely due to increases in public supply and landscape recreational sectors. So again, that's a huge amount of water. We have to emphasize the importance of conservation measures. This is even looking so far as things like incorporated native planting onto canal banks where possible, using pervious pavements and other sort of integrated approaches that will allow us to set some additional water aside so that we have enough in the future. We're also really would encourage the district to continue to take a forefronting role in terms of education and urging the public to do their own part and to replace significant portions of turf grass lawns with native plants to help address this conservation issue. So all in all, we're excited to see the plan move forward. We're happy to see it wrap up, and we appreciate being able to be involved in the process.
Thank you, Ms. Cox. We'll hear next from Mark Perry.
Good afternoon again. I'm Mark Perry. Again, like Kelly said, probably last time, but I also have comments that kind of relate to the thank you. I've known Mark Elsner and his team for many years, and working on these water supply plans are always long-term and arduous and really tough to do, and he does an excellent job. Your staff does an excellent job in pulling these all together, so kudos and compliments to all that. With the 11% increase in demand over the next several years during this period of time for the Lower East Coast, it's gonna look at. I recall back when I think it was Secretary Colleen Castillo from DEP and the director here, the district went down southeast Florida and said, we can't approve consumptive use permits for this proposed development. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that. And it was concerning that, their water supply is limited in what we do down there. Also, I remember probably about 20 years or more ago, the city of Hollywood was moving their well fields further west and spending over $10 or $12 million to do that because of saltwater intrusion. We didn't talk much about climate change in this, but the sea level is rising, and that's definitely a threat to those groundwater sources that are along the Lower East Coast. So it kind of leads us back to the original sourcing for a recharge of the Biscayne Aquifer, and that's Lake Okeechobee. And Lake Okeechobee should come into play versus the groundwater, and how we move that water south and do that is really important. On an average, these last 3 water year averages, which you'll see data for, about 268 billion gallons has gone east and west on an average year to tide, basically to the Atlantic or Gulf of Mexico. And 1.7 billion goes to tide every day through all these canals and discharges. And we've only sent that's about 823,000 acre feet, but we've only sent about 449,000 acre feet south from the lake on an average year over these past 3 water years. So what that means to me is, with further emphasis of operations in LOSM and putting more water south, storing it and treating it and getting it south is really key to help the Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan meet its demands. And I just encourage us to do that and look into that more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Next, we'll move over to our virtual participants with Eva Webb. Ms. Webb, please unmute your mic.
Yes, and I am so sorry. I was on earlier I lost power and I had to get back on. I missed the previous comment section. I'm hoping I'll be able to say something about that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the farmers and the EAA. And of course, I did want to also mention, I've been in Florida for 56 years. I moved here as a teenager, and so I've seen a lot of changes. Lake Okeechobee is one of them, and of course, the influx of citizens to Palm Beach County and South Florida as well. There's been some big changes there to the loss of all the farmland in the East Coast, and of course, all of the new homes and the development that's gone in that has increased the demand for water, of course. And I just wanted to say that I've seen a lot happen also in the western side of the county with all the agriculture that comes into play as well. I think that one of the things I wanted to talk about mostly today, with all of that being said, is I recently read in a newspaper article in Okeechobee that, and I missed it on your webpage, where you had recognized the Everglades agricultural area farmers for their continued water quality achievements. And I wanted to thank you for that, recognizing their accomplishments to meet those water quality standards. And as you know, this doesn't happen by accident. Our EAA farmers they use the innovative modern farming practices and technology to maintain and protect the soil and the water. And we have some of the most innovative and environmentally conscious farmers in the world. Farms constantly monitor water quality and through scientific best management practices continue to take measures to keep nutrient-rich soils on the fields and out of our water. This takes dedication, science, and serious financial investment by our farmers who farm in the most stringently monitored farming area for soil, water, and air quality in the United States. Farmers continue to make this investment in safeguarding the land and water for future generations and to protect our ability to feed a hungry nation. Our EAA farmers are an important link to the process to help reduce nutrients from water before water goes into the stormwater treatment areas and water conservation areas, which feed into the Everglades as well. Through these concerted efforts by our farmers and scientists from South Florida Water Management District and the University of Florida, research shows that 90% of the Everglades meet the ultra clean water quality standards of 10 parts per billion or less for nutrients. This is an unprecedented accomplishment. I was really shocked by that number. I was really surprised and happily so. And I would just like to congratulate our farmers. I hope that you'll join me in congratulating our EAA farmers for their commitment and for nearly 3 decades of clean water success. And with that.
Comments? Ms. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we have no additional public comment.
Thank you all for your comments. So, Mr. Elser, I guess first of all, I want to start by thanking you and your staff for an incredible job. I know this is really complicated and you've got a really good staff and you're definitely one of the experts on this. And I appreciate your recommendation. There was a commenter earlier, and I think he referenced a report that came out last week that said Florida's about to run out of water. Is that, I know that you're probably not going to, that's a little bit out of your purview, but I'd just like to hear, is that something that's come across your radar?
I don't think the question is we're going to run out of water. We're going to run out of cheap water. And I think Drew commented on this in July that right now we've pretty much maximized the freshwater resources in our area and meeting consumptive uses. So now we're going deeper into the Floridan aquifer and ultimately you may have seawater. So it's not we're going to run out of water, it's the cheap water.
Thanks, Mr. Elser. Mr. Butler? Mr. Steinle? Does anyone else have any comments? All right. I need a motion to enter a final order approving the 2023-2024 Lower East Coast Water Supply Plan update.
Make a motion?
Second.
Thanks. I have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call that question. Mr. Steinle?
Yes.
I'm going to vote yes. Mr. Butler?
Yes.
Let's see. Mr. Martinez?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Ms. Meads?
Yes.
Thank you. Colonel Rowan?
Yes.
Thanks. That passes unanimously. Thanks very much, Mr. Elser.
Thank you very much.
We'll move now to technical reports, item number 35 with Mr. Mitnick and Mr. Glenn.
All right. Afternoon. So I guess I'll start by welcoming everybody to the other side as we've just passed the peak of hurricane season, or have we? We'll talk about that a little bit towards the end of the presentation. So looking at rainfall there, you can see the month of August was pretty much near normal rainfall, just a bare sliver below that average number. So far for September, you can see we've got a pretty decent amount of rain so far just this month, and we still got about half the month to go. So we'll see how September finishes up. But overall, you can see there on the left-hand side, as of right now for the month, we're 150% plus above normal. District-wide, a lot of that has been centered in up north of the lake, around the lake, and just to the south, not that much over there in the southeast coast or the lower west coast. which leaves us overall for the wet season there on the right-hand side, pretty much just slightly above normal, with the majority of that, even with the excess rains that we've experienced this past month, north of the lake, still the north of the lake portions are below normal for the overall wet season going back to May 1st. So how do those lakes in the upper chain kind of look like? Starting there in the upper right hand with East Lake, you can see now it's back above its regulation schedule, but this time of the year, that schedule is rising. We're still not up to its winter pool there on the far right-hand side of that graphic. So with those rains, the lake will continue to rise. We've initiated operations to start moving water out of East Lake and moving it down over into West Lake, which is there on the bottom right-hand side. So its schedules come up and it's just bumping slightly above its regulation schedule. Again, that schedule is also rising. Going to the top left, and this is part of what Mr. Butler already touched on in his comments this morning, you can see there's a new series of lines in that graph. That is the increment 1 as we progress towards headwater. It's not the full headwaters implementation. Mr. Butler had talked about 54. Increment 1 tops out at 53 feet NGVD. So as you can see with all those additional lines on the graph right in this area, you heard Mr. Butler say as we start traversing vertically and lake starts rising, each one of those zones calls for higher and higher releases from Lake Kissimmee, Cypress Hatch, and all group. So that's the operations that we've been implementing now that we are in increment 1. So as these rains up here at the top have brought those inflows, plus all the water coming down from East Lake and West Lake into the KCH group, we have increased those flows down the river, and here's Lawrence to tell you what that's doing.
And implementing increment 1 is a real big deal for Kissimmee River restoration. So that project, is a two-part project. It's let's do the infrastructure improvements in the lower basin and get the river back to the same form it was historically. And the second part is let's implement the appropriate hydrology that comes from that water in the upper basin. So you see the change right now with 810 CFS, the floodplain is starting to inundate. That's where the floodplain should be during the wet season. We were keeping it dry intentionally for them to finish, the Army Corps being them, fixing the damage to the S69 weir. That's complete, so it's game on for let's get the floodplain inundated the way it was historically and start reaping those benefits of the project. So for Kissimmee, increment 1 is a really big deal, and it's a really good step towards us realizing all the benefits of the project. And looking at the river itself, this top graph shows at about 1,400 CFS is when we have exchange of water from the river channel onto the floodplain, so you start to move water laterally onto the floodplain. We haven't gotten there yet, but we've had a lot of rainfall that started to, well, we have gotten there. And in this period of record, it's showing we weren't at 810, but we are today. So we're going to start seeing that floodplain become inundated. And we have a period of time over which our target is about 150 to 180 days that we want the floodplain inundated. It's that protracted inundation and protracted recession rate. And that's where Mr. Butler talked about we're not filling up Kissimmee, Cypress, and Hatch Nahal to hold water as a static reservoir. We are allowing water to go high to have a volume that can be delivered to the Kissimmee so that the floodplain can ebb and flow through that floodplain, and so that we can push water out there and have it out there for the length of period that we need for it to be ecologically beneficial. You don't want to put it out there for a day. You don't want to put it out there for a week. You need several months for all those processes to happen that are important for the environment. So that's what we're going to start to see as we move forward.
Lawrence, can I interrupt you for just a second? As that happens, will that help clean that water as it heads down to the lake?
It does. The Kissimmee doesn't have a water quality target, and it wasn't a water quality project, but you have 40,000 acres of marsh there that the STAs cleanse water. These marshes also will have a phosphorus reduction benefit. And then looking at dissolved oxygen levels, so we're right here right now about 4.6 milligrams per liter, which is well above the threshold for concern for aquatic organisms.
So going a little bit farther down in the system, you can see here for Lake Okeechobee, so far we've received just over 550,000 acre feet of inflows directly into Lake Okeechobee. So to put that in perspective, that's a little bit more than a foot of water of inflows into the lake. And you'll see on the subsequent slides for the lake hydrograph how that has resulted in the lake stage increasing when Lawrence talks in relation to the ecological and the recovery envelopes. But looking over on the east coast here, you can see there's been about 17,000 acre feet that have been moved from C44 basin water, inclusive of that water that comes out of the C44 reservoir, which is also basin water, towards the St. Lucie estuary. Add to that, as you heard in Mark Perry's comments earlier, the additional flows from C23-24, about 130,000 acre feet, and the 61,000, I'll call it, acre feet up around the Fort Pierce area to the Indian River Lagoon. Over on the west coast, in total, there's been about 800,000 acre feet of water that has been moved towards the Caloosahatchee estuary, with about 152,000 acre feet of that having originated back here in Lake Okeechobee. So just looking forward, now that we are within the full implementation of the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual, there's no longer the dueling graphics on this slide, so we're fully switched over to just Lake Okeechobee LOSM, as well as the conditional positional analysis that I've presented over the last several months. So you can see pretty much several, given the climate forecasts over the next several months, you pretty much reside within that big zone D within LOSM that gives the 2,000 up to 2,000 cubic feet per second going to the west and 0 to the east. So that's the way the kind of the future looks, and only under those extreme dry conditions that there would be the risk of going down into the water shortage management ban by the end of next or this coming dry season actually. But as I said, we're not entirely out of the hurricane season. I'll again touch on that at the end of the presentation. But there's a relatively small chance, or I'd say less than 10% chance, that you could wind up there in zone BC by the end of this wet season. Lawrence?
So where we are in Lake Okeechobee stage, we're currently at 14.67, and you see in a typical year, we would be intercepting the ecological envelope, and that's where we want to be. You'd see the marsh over here is inundated, where that's providing habitat and for all kinds of different organisms. It's generating the prey base for next season's wading birds. But from an SAV standpoint, which many people are concerned about, we don't look at the standard ecological envelope, but we instead look at the recovery envelope, and that's a lower level. It's a lower level to start from at the end of the dry season, to try to, or end of the wet season, to try to get down to a dry season low that's beneficial for, allowing photosynthesis to occur in a large portion of the near shore zone for SAV recovery. And we've been paralleling that zone, but we haven't entered it yet, and we've had a recent uptick from the rains over the past couple of days. But you'll see there's a period from about mid-October until January. If we do go above this 15, there is time for the lake to come back down in the drier months to get back into this recovery envelope as we move forward, and that certainly is my hope. Looking at how water is entering and exiting the lake, we have a lot more water coming into the lake currently. That's just easy to see on the side with the orange and blue. Go Gators, Merry Cruise. So you've got a lot of rainfall falling on the lake and inflows coming into the lake, and we aren't able to push water out to the Caloosahatchee side right now. We have a recommendation of 2,000 CFS, but there has been so much rainfall that basin has been absorbing the ability for us to move water out of the lake. From a Lake Okeechobee cyanobacterial bloom intensity and distribution sense, we're really getting to the end of blue-green algae season, and you can see that in the latest September 8th graphic from NOAA. It's really low, and that's a great thing. This temperature up here on the red line is 30 degrees, and that's really above that is where Microcystis can outcompete the other organisms. We get below 25 and blue-green algae really stops producing for the most part on the lake. We're above that 30, but it's starting to trend downward. You know, we collect, during blue-green algae season, we collect samples at 32 sites on the lake every 2 weeks. And we look at those and we look to see, you know, what kind of toxins are being produced, what level of toxin is being produced, and which taxa are out there. So we have a really good idea of you know, what we can expect from blue-green algae. And we see that, you know, a month ago, look at the lake. The lake's in pretty full bloom. Anything that is above this value right here, but above 40 micrograms per liter of chlorophyll A is a bloom, and you have bloom across almost all of the lake. Then you go and you look and you see, well, if we have all of these different blue-green algae out there, what's the dominant taxa? And Microcystis is the one that we're most concerned with because it produces microcystin. And you see that at that period of time, it is producing microcystin, some above the 8 milligrams per liter, which is the EPA standard for recreational use, and that concerning. But as we move forward in time, we see that the lake, in our last sampling, we had no toxins being produced. I've talked about the dissolved inorganic nitrogen that is in the water and that concentration, and that's needed for the blooms to occur. But then microcystin, the toxin itself, is very nitrogen rich. So when you start using up that nitrogen, now it can bloom, but it doesn't really have that ability to produce the toxin. So we're on the downside of toxin producing. We might see some waxing and waning of blooms through the end of the season, which should be about the end, October-ish. But we're really through the height of blue-green algae on the Lake Okeechobee. As we move over to the estuaries in the St. Lucie estuary, yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman, if I could, before we move on, back to Lake Okeechobee, you and John, what, you know, we're at the wet season, still in the wet season. We haven't had a major storm event yet, but it's been extremely wet the last 2 weeks since Labor Day. I think the conditions are saturated. So I'm going to ask the question, what's the likelihood under a new lake's operation schedule that we see a recovery mode tripped? And at what point would we see that? When would we begin to look at that, make that decision? What's the likelihood at this point? Talking getting the lake into an ecological beneficial type range and hopefully promoting some SAV growth.
So looking at LOSUM, as we've talked about a couple different times leading up to the planning of LOSUM, there are essentially 3 triggers that turn on recovery operations. If you recall, a couple of months back, I explained the difference between recovery mode, recovery envelope, recovery operations. They all mean different things. There are 3 items that turn it on, so to speak, and then there are 3 items that turn it off. Right now, the 2 of those 3 that turn it on have already tripped. So you could say there is looking likely that recovery operations could be implemented, because when we look down at those items that turn it off, so to speak, one of those things has to do with the ENSO forecast and the strength of La Nina. Right now, early on in the wet season, we had been forecasting, or not actually us, but the Climate Prediction Center had been forecasting a relatively strong La Nina event. And you'll see this a little bit farther on in the presentation when I get to those graphics. But over the last several months and weeks, that strength has been declining. So it may not be as strong a La Nina. So you ask, when is that time frame in that decision-making process? So the way LOSUM is laid out is at the end of the wet season, so we're talking October, November timeframe. The Corps of Engineers starts that deliberation and they hold a public meeting. We'll be talking about their dry season operations. And it's in that context, receiving input from the stakeholders and a wide variety of people and agencies included, where they make the decision whether or not they will implement recovery operations. You can see from the last several weeks in the Water Management District's weekly recommendation to the Corps, we are trying to drive the lake towards that recovery envelope, the green envelope that was on the previous slide that Lawrence had just showed, with the idea of trying to implement some of those lake management techniques ahead of getting into the dry season, where you don't have to implement those recovery operations that result in those additional potentially damaging discharges both east and west. So it's still a lot to play out. The decision is not made whether or not recovery operations will be or won't be implemented. We're still playing out the rest of the wet season and managing what Mother Nature brings us right now.
Thank you.
So looking at the St. Lucie, currently the total inflows are about 2,900 CFS. Something important to note up here is that blue represents discharge from Lake Okeechobee. There's no Lake Okeechobee discharges since April of '24, but there are large amounts of basin runoff happening currently. And what we're seeing over here is a salinity gradient where the two forks are pretty fresh. You have your brackish in the middle as we go to the mouth, which is a pretty good setup, but it is a little bit fresh in that it has taken salinity down below 10, which is the lower point of the beneficial range for adult oysters. And looking at oyster recruitment currently, for this past month, for August, it was about the same it was in June. This side can have a bimodal type of reproduction, so we could see an increase at the end of the season, and we'll just have to wait that out and see what occurs. Coming back over to the Caloosahatchee, as I mentioned before, this gray here, so here's gray, here's the entire the basin for the Caloosahatchee is quite large, and you see all of that runoff that's coming from the basin itself, which is passing through S79. So we haven't, the Army Corps has not been able to push a lot of lake water out of Lake Okeechobee. The salinity gradient within the Caloosahatchee hasn't changed much from last month. It's still fresh all the way down to Cape Coral. And we're seeing this area right here in the middle, which is still in the beneficial zone for adult oysters. But let me show you recruitment, which is pretty phenomenal. Up at the Cape Coral area, this isn't the area where we expect to have the greatest amount of oyster recruitment, but look at what's going on down here at Shell Point. I mean, it is just off the chart compared to the last 3 years. So salinity conditions have been really good on this side this year for recruitment, and that's speaking very well for oysters within the Caloosahatchee.
South of the lake, you can see all the way over here on the right-hand side of the graphic, as stormwater treatment areas have processed just a little bit more than 600,000 acre feet so far this water year, going back to May 1st. You'll recall from the previous slide, the Everglades agricultural area, that basin has received about 161% above normal rainfall in the month of September. So currently the STAs are still churning through a lot of that water and that direct rainfall. Looking at the radar just a couple minutes ago, there's rain moving across the area. So they'll more than likely be managing that runoff for the next several days and on into next week.
So as John mentioned, there's been a lot of inflow into the STAs, and you can see they're all really above their optimal water depth currently. And you look up at these numbers and the performance numbers, and you look at them, and they're not the numbers that we typically want to see. I mean, they're high. You have STA2 at 62, STA34 at 21. Last month, and I want to take you through that again this month, what we look at here is these excursions from that one June event that took phosphorus flow-weighted mean concentrations coming into these STAs well above their historic period of record. So that period of records from 2001 to 2020, I believe. And you look at these values, and they are so high. Here, the dotted line represents what that period of record average is, and this is about 70 above. This is over 100 above. This is 200 above. I mean, it's really intense from all of that volume that came into the STAs at one time from that June event. Really brought the inflow concentrations up. So what we do is, if you look up at the top, and we're looking at year-to-date, water year-to-date numbers, and that's beginning on May 1st. So it's the past 4 months. What have we seen, and what's the performance been? And if you look at this top row up here, you have inflow concentrations 162, 210, 139, 282, and it has those higher levels of outflows. If you average that over 365 days, if you look at what it's been for the year, those volumes or those numbers start to decrease or diminish. But then if you start to look at it, if you take this event out and you start to look at 28-day numbers, you start to get things like, you go from 162 to 150 to 75 to 46. You're seeing on 7 days, it's looking better. So you take that outlier out of your data, and you see that the STAs are still performing really well. If you look at what the outflow concentrations are on that same type of interval, you go from 31 to 27 to 21 to 20. So when you take out that really large storm event that occurred, I mean, it happened, and it brought really large concentrations into the STAs. You look at it, how it's performing over the past month and the past week, and the STAs are performing really well. Look over here at STA2, which was putting out, I'm showing 64 on that graph, and the 28-day average and 14-day average, are down to 17 and 14, and STA34 is at 10. So the STAs do a really good job when water is delivered in a more managed way. But these stochastic events that bring extremely large volumes that are well outside of the period of record are going to have results that kind of skew our data onto how well the STAs really perform. Yes, sir.
So to go along with that, what operations A1 FEB, were we able during that event, to put water into A1? And I'm catching you off guard here on this.
No, and see, that's important, because you look over here and you see that STA 3.4 is really the most connected to the A1 FEB, and water delivery is out of that FEB. That's something we can do. Was it S6? Yeah, S6 is STA2. It couldn't take water through the FEB. That was pumping because of flood control. And so we had to take that water directly into STA2 without the ability to go through the FEB. So when the FEB is available and we can meter water out of it, that works. When it's not available, or if it's in a STA that doesn't have, volume available in its STA and its FEB, then it has to go directly into the STA, and we don't get that kind of first cleansing benefit before we put the water into the STA itself.
And just to add to that, in this June event, we were absolutely using the storage available in the A1 FEB. And there's a similar set of performance graphics, just like Lawrence has up here, for the STAs for the A1 FEB. And you can see a very similar trend, especially in the recent 28-day and 7-day data, that it's producing in parts per billion in the teens.
But that not having a red circle on STA 3.4 really highlights maybe what that FEB has provided.
Correct.
So we've got the only other major storage we've got going on right now is A2. Would A2 be able to help in this case?
You're talking about the A2 reservoir? Absolutely. Yep. I mean, when we talk that big first flush and that extreme rain event back in June, the A2 reservoir would serve to suck up so to speak, all of that water and put it into storage and then slowly meter it back out to the treatment facilities. And that's what Lawrence was describing, is that attenuation of that flow, not those peaks and surges, is what we're trying to get back to in the operation of the stormwater treatment areas, and have not a constant, but a little bit more regulated, metered sheet flow through the STAs. Hopefully this sounds familiar as you do water quality treatment.
Okay, I mean, I didn't want to get by this slide without making sure that
Sure.
point was made. I mean, it's the more storage all around the system,
Absolutely.
the better our STAs work, when you can meter it in, so, no, thank you.
I guess my takeaway from this is we don't do very well at the extremes, pretty well on the averages, until we have some more storage come online.
Correct. We've talked about this already, and Mr. Wojtek came up and talked about it as well, but we're looking at our agricultural area basin source control program and the results over the last water year of 2024. And so for the EAA, the target is a 25% reduction, which is shown here. And for the last year, as he also mentioned, we have a 46% reduction in phosphorus loading to the downstream water bodies, which is fantastic. And over the period of record that we have here, he also mentioned it's been a 57% reduction. If we don't, this is a two-part test that if you don't have it in 1 year, you have to be in compliance within the next 3 years. But we haven't had that issue since 2007. And then when you go and you look at the C-139 basin, you have basically, you establish what your target value is, which is what these yellow diamonds are, and then you have a limit over which you cannot exceed. If your actual load, which in this year was, I believe it was 63 tons, and the target was 55 tons, and the limit was 155 tons over which you cannot exceed. If your diamonds, both diamonds, are not in the green bar, then you have met your performance target. And this year you see that we're, although it was, 8 tons greater than the target that was established, it's well below the limit. So performance is pretty fantastic.
I think all three of us reached for our mics here. I just want to say, while this slide's up, good job, thank you. I mean, that's just the operations, the BMPs that the farmers are implementing. This is proof that it helps, and it helps in the greater system, and helps even those loads that we just saw on the previous slide. So I just thank you.
Yeah, tying this back to the previous slide, and help me with this one, Lawrence, is this, where is this measured? Is this measured going into the STAs and the FEBs, or is this measured going out of them?
This is measured coming off of the EAA before it reaches into the STAs and coming out of the C-139 basin.
Gotcha, thanks.
And something that I found pretty interesting is if we go back over to the EAA, and we see this 46% for this year, and we see 57% for the next year. Percentages can be kind of deceiving in that this reduction was 110 metric tons, and this was 138 tons. So they're very close in load, but the percentages kind of make it a little wonky because you have some math that goes into it. But it's a tremendous reduction in tonnage of phosphorus. So that's outstanding.
Lawrence, that's what I was confused about. I probably asked you this same thing last year, but looking at 24, it's a 40% reduction from where? What's the baseline of comparison here?
Oh,
You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I'm racking my brain.
I'm trying to gauge. I'm trying to gauge what the trend lines are. In other words, reduction by law of 25%. It's not a reduction of 25% from the previous year.
No, it's from a baseline period that was established, and it's before that period of record. So they looked at rainfall over a period, and they looked at what loads were associated with that, and they generated okay, here is a baseline period from which we need to reduce. And I can come back next time and explain it much better, but this is just off the top of my head. So there is a baseline, a number from which they are saying we need to reduce from that number. And each year, it takes into account the rainfall in a way that it is adjusted to make it apples to apples with what happened in that baseline period. So that, if you have greater rainfall, you're going to have usually a greater load, but it makes it so that when you look at that comparison, it can be comparable back to what the baseline period was.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, taking rainfall as a factor. I guess what I was going to ask for is sort of a trend line from baseline, if that makes sense. In other words, if the baseline was from, let's say, 1990 to 1996, that's where your starting point is, and you want a 25% reduction off of that, one year you're getting 73%, another year you're getting 40%. Can you tell me over time, maybe there's too many factors involved, but can you tell me over time from that baseline what our reduction has been? In other words, because if you go 40% reduction today is great, but it sort of reduces the impact, and maybe I'm not saying this the right way, of the 80% reduction in, for instance, 2015. What's the trend line? Obviously, we want to show, and I'm sure there is a downward sloping trend line in terms of reduction.
Yeah, there is, and there's actually, there's a more interesting, in my opinion, trend line that is actually increasing through time, and it's showing the additional, each year, it shows a load that has been reduced. And it shows you from that first time that we did it, just how much phosphorus has been reduced over that amount of time.
I think that would be helpful, because if I look at this, and maybe I'm misinterpreting it, we're taking, let's say 3 steps forward and sometimes 2 steps back.
Right.
And that leaves us 1 step forward.
Yeah,
That's not the right way to read it.
Right, we have an additive trend line that really expresses the wow value of just the amount of phosphorus that has been reduced, and I can show you that next time.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Steinle, real quick, the way you described it, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I would not view the data that way. Simply because, you heard Wes Gregory talk about numbers don't lie, but you can tell a lot of stories with numbers. So the reason why I say don't view it that way, because one of the major factors that you're not considering from that perspective is the rainfall. Every year is different in the rainfall. So we'll get the additional data and that other graphic that Lawrence was describing, and we can sit down with you and talk about the different trends and the progress that has been made.
Looking at the stormwater treatment areas themselves, only 2 cells currently are offline, and that's for construction activities that are ongoing. But otherwise, everybody else is up and operating, and we're doing a lot of work in our STAs to keep them functioning extremely well.
All right, so transition a little bit farther down in the system. You can see with all of that rainfall and water movement, how much water has entered the Everglades so far. You're right there, just about a little bit below 1 million acre feet has been moved into the water conservation areas, and about 600,000 or a little bit more than 600,000 acre feet, inclusive of some of that return water over there on the eastern side, has been moved down into Everglades National Park. Along the lower East Coast, you see, because of the excess rains directly over the water conservation area, plus those additional inflows, we have implemented operations over the past several weeks and months to move some of that water that was in Area 1 and Area 2, as well as Area 3, out to tide. So far, we've moved about 163,000 acre feet from the water conservation areas out to tide to the Intercoastal Waterway. But from urban runoff along the lower East Coast, there's about 1.2 million acre feet of water that has been moved off to the Intercoastal Waterway to tide, and about a little over 800,000 of that has been down in the lower portion of the system there towards Biscayne Bay. So what has all that water movement done to the conservation areas themselves? You can see with that June event that we just spent some time talking about how Area 1, Area 2, as well as Area 3 all responded to that event by increasing their stages. Quickly, the Corps of Engineers implemented operations to reduce that rate of rise in Area 1 and has now managed Area 1 and gotten it below schedule. Now that we're sitting over here in the month of September, and you can pretty much anticipate with future rains, we'll work along with the Corps to have Area 1 start rising back up towards its winter pool here. Area 2, you can still see, is still continuing to rise. As I said, there's a lot of water that's getting processed through the stormwater treatment areas that makes its way into Area 2 right now. It's still above schedule, and the rate of accession has decreased, but the Corps of Engineers got a pretty good handle on that right now, and we're continuing to move some of that water where we can when there's not conflicting rainfall along the lower East Coast off into tide. So looking at Area 3, it's been relatively flat. The Corps has reclosed all of the S11s, so there's no longer water moving from Area 2 into Area 3. It's just that water that's coming in from the north, as well as the western side of Area 3A that is contributing to those inflows. But for the most part, Area 3 has been relatively steady. We're trying to implement those operations, start bringing it down. All of the S12s are still open, along with 343A, B, and 344. We're continuing to move a lot of water into the L29 canal, and it's subject to that constraint for the protection of Tamiami Trail and the roadway. Going down the South Dade conveyance system, with a lot of those operations, we have, I think it was about a week ago, maybe a little bit more than that, we did have to implement operations to crack open S197 all the way at the bottom end of the system to do about 200 CFS discharging out there into Card Sound. So the system is performing as you would expect for this deep into the wet season. Things have been full since that June rainfall here in the southern portion of the system, and we was trying to churn through all of that water and management as best we can. So is what you can reasonably expect going out into the future, just the conditional position analysis for both Area 3 over here on the right-hand side and Area 2 over here on the left-hand side. You can see pretty much Area 2 will remain above its schedule as it typically does. As I've talked about in prior presentations, there's a whole effort right now led by Lawrence's scientists and the water managers, along with the Corps of Engineers, to take another look at Area 2's regulation schedule and try to develop a schedule that is more in tune with the ecology of Area 2. Similarly, looking over there at Area 3, you can pretty much figure that over the next several months we'll get it back below its schedule, barring another extreme rainfall event, but it looks like to be trending in the right direction, and those water levels will start coming down over the next several weeks until we get Area 3 back below its regulation schedule and reduce those high water levels that you've heard a fair number of comments about so far. So this is also the time of the year that I need to remind the board of the seasonal operations in South Miami-Dade. Specifically, we're talking about the three structures, S21A, S20F, and 179. Primarily, it's these two, 21 and S20F, where we reduce those canal levels to facilitate agricultural operations in and around that Homestead area, around Homestead Air Force Base. So it's a typical, we work with the farmers. It typically begins there around October 15th, and we monitor the farming operations and the field levels. And based on those visual on-site inspections, at the conclusion of the seasonal operations is when we back out of those operations and return to normal operations. So with that, Lawrence.
Thank you. Looking at salinity conditions in Biscayne Bay, we've had a lot of input into the bay of fresh water, and it's driven those salinity levels down. When we look at the near shore of Biscayne Bay, Salinity levels there from a restoration standpoint, those numbers are really from about 5 to 18 in salinity. And so where we are right now at about just about those numbers, salinity in Biscayne Bay looks really good. And then coming down into water depths, as John was talking about, to look at that visually within each of the water treatment areas, as well as down into Everglades National Park, we're seeing that there has been, that increase. So there's, when you see the yellow starting to go away, it means it's getting deeper. So we have gotten a little deeper in Water Conservation Area 1, Water Conservation Area 2. You've got this, we traditionally pond here along the L67. But as we see the, a little increased ponding down here at the bottom, so that's where the 12s are, and everything's open and trying to equilibrate across the Tamiami Trail. But what we see in Everglades National Park is you have fantastic connectivity in the sloughs. You've got Lossman Slough, Shark River Slough coming around to Taylor Slough. Those conditions look outstanding. And as you go in and you look at salinity levels in Florida Bay, both in the 3 different areas that we like to monitor, eastern, central, and western, we've talked about this interquartile range in the past. That was a good place to be, but our dotted line is more of a restoration target that we're trying to hit. So within the Eastern Bay, salinities are looking really good. And so the Eastern Bay has a pretty heavy influence from the 5 creeks that are over here, as well as Taylor Slough coming down directly. And then as you move further western in the bay, you have less of an influence from what's coming on through Taylor Slough. But we have good conditions in the Central Bay, and we're starting to get a little bit elevated in the Western Bay. But overall, salinity conditions in Florida Bay are looking really good.
So looking at what the future holds, as I alluded to, as we transition from the wet season on over in towards the dry season, you can see transition from the above average rainfalls into closer to slightly above or leaning above towards equal chances. And then when you get into the heart of the dry season, come the beginning of next calendar year, it's leaning more towards the below average rainfall conditions. So that was what I was kind of alluding to, in the sense that we're waiting to see how La Nina plays out and what the strength of this below average rainfall is. As we exit the wet season out there in October, hopefully, we'll get a little bit better handle on that and what the sea surface temperatures over in the equatorial Pacific really look like. So more to come in that arena. Over the next couple of days, we got some decent weather that's moving around South Florida as Francine tracks off the southeast coast of the country. So it'll still bring us a little bit of rain over the next couple of days, just those trailing edges of it as we move out for the next week or so. So at the beginning, I said we're past the peak of hurricane season, but are we really? This is sort of what I was alluding to. We're kind of right here, right now. So when you look right now, we are past the peak of the typical hurricane season if you factor in hurricane activity for the entire country in the continental US. But if you're a little bit more selfish and you only care about our neck of the woods, then what you'll notice, and we narrow that down to just around Florida and the 50 kilometers around Florida and what activity Florida sees, you can see there's a double peak. That this is the traditional peak of the hurricane season, but we sort of get a double peak here in South Florida out into October. So we've made it past the big one, but we've still got the small one to go, and we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. But this graph up on the top of the screen, where it talks about ACE, to put generically, that just is a measure of the amount of energy that is in the atmosphere. It's accumulated cyclonic energy, I think is what the term stands for. So that's what that second peak is about right out here, where there's still a lot of energy in the atmosphere around Florida that tropical systems tend to feed off of that time of year. So as I said, we'll just see how it all plays out. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you both. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that? Great. Thanks. We'll move to item number 36, which is the monthly financial report with Ms. Heater.
Good afternoon. Thank you. So the monthly financial report that is in your packet is through July 31st. So as of July 31st, we have collected $971 million in revenue, and we have spent $803 million. The $971 million comprises of $573 million of intergovernmental revenue that is mostly generated from state appropriations through reimbursements for Everglades restoration, and $343 million from taxes from Avalon. We collected $48 million from June to July, of which 38 of that was through the intergovernmental. We fully collected all of our Avalon taxes, so we're 100% collection. To compare to July of last year, we've collected $204 million more this year in July compared to July of last year, and that is because of the reimbursements. You know, projects are moving. On the expenditure side, as I'd mentioned, we expended $803 million, $83 million over the previous month, $52 in restoration, and $20 million in operations and maintenance. Comparing to July of last year, we've spent $89 million more this year. We are 77% obligated and committed. And a final note, your finance, budget, procurement, and SAP teams this month of September, are actively prepping the financial system and activities to close fiscal year 24 and then to begin fiscal year 25 on October 1. So that concludes my report to you.
Great. Thanks, Candy. Does anyone have any comments or questions? We'll look forward to the budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move now to general public comment.
We have none, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And we'll move to final board comment. Mr. Steinley?
I have none.
Mr. Butler?
I have none, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez?
I have none, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Bergeron?
I have none, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Ms. Meads?
I have none.
Thanks. Colonel Roman?
I have none.
I'll keep it going. As I did mention earlier, we will have our public hearing on fiscal year 2024-25 tentative millage rates, tax rolls, and tentative budget public hearing today at 5:15. If you're going to join the meeting by Zoom, you'll be able to use the same link. The link is also posted on the district's website, and we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thanks.